Martial Peak, Chapter 5993, The Mighty Current of the Dragon Pool. On the main battlefield, the difficult situation faced by the Allied army had been greatly eased, all thanks to Zhang Ruoxi. The Black Ink clan had paid an exorbitant price to take down Zhang Ruoxi, resulting in the loss of hundreds of royal lords and yielding less than desirable results. If the human race army had not desperately escorted the 8 divine spirits to aid her at the last moment, the Black Ink clan's plans to kill Zhang Ruoxi would most likely have succeeded, and once she was dead, there would no longer be anybody on the battlefield with sufficient strength to pose a threat to the Black Ink clan. At that moment, the 2 giant spirit gods were trapped by over 100 royal lords. They were too busy fending for themselves to spare any energy to rescue the human race army. Fortunately, Zhang Ruoxi eventually won the battle. The price of her victory was the lives of 5 divine spirits, but all the royal lords surrounding and besieging her had been eliminated in exchange. Furthermore, Su Yan had successfully been crowned as the Phoenix Empress. The enormous figure of the ice phoenix radiated with a bone-chilling cold that froze everything in its wake. Even space itself was no exception. Be that as it may, the situation remained bleak. The Black Ink clan had twice as many troops as the Allied army, which gave them a numerical advantage that was difficult to overcome. Furthermore, not all of the royal lords had been eliminated in the skirmish with Zhang Ruoxi. The enemy had preserved enough royal lords to maintain the situation on the main battlefield despite their attempt to kill Zhang Ruoxi. At this moment, the difference in strength between the 2 sides had not shrunk, but instead increased significantly. The main cause for this was that the small stone race died at a much faster rate than the Black Ink clan. Su Yan's rebirth had only managed to help stabilize the situation by a small margin. The human race army would need an even greater injection of strength to prevent things from deteriorating, much less win the battle. A continuous wave of dragon roars reverberated throughout the void. When the power of Yang Zhao's dragon vein reached a certain limit, the aura of the divine dragon erupted. Then, the body of a 100,000-meter-long white dragon emerged, its enormous dragon head rising high above, overlooking all living creatures from a lofty height. Yang Zhao had succeeded in ascending to the realm of divine dragon. At the same time, the aura of a 9th-order divine spirit radiated from Pai Xiu. 8 divine spirits had stepped forward to help Zhang Ruoxi, and though 5 had died in battle, the remaining 3 had successfully overcome their respective shackles and risen to greater heights. It was important to note that the difference in impact a 9th-order divine spirit like Pai Xiu could play on the battlefield compared to a newly advanced 9th-order human master was enormous. That was because the divine spirits were inherently stronger than 9th-order humans by a large margin. As soon as Yang Zhao and Pai Xiu joined forces and charged into the battlefield, a large swath was cut into the ranks of the Black Ink clan army. The overwhelming aura of the divine spirits flooded the void, causing countless Black Ink clan soldiers to perish. In the distant void, another silver divine dragon was rampaging across the battlefield. His entire body was drenched in blood, and many of his tough dragon scales had been torn or blasted off. This silver divine dragon was none other than Fu Guang. Regardless of his immense strength, he was bound to sustain injuries in such a chaotic and intense battlefield. When Fu Guang saw Yang Zhao charging into the battlefield after becoming a divine dragon, he immediately rushed over towards him. At the same time, a series of dragon roars were exchanged between them, as though they were communicating with each other. It did not take long before Yang Zhao seemed to understand the situation, and he quickly sliced a bloody path through his enemies to approach Fu Guang. A short while later, the 2 divine dragons gathered at the same place. In terms of size alone, Fu Guang was undoubtedly larger than Yang Zhao. This was only natural as Fu Guang had been a divine dragon for a much longer time. The 2 behemoths began to draw upon the power of their dragon veins, causing their vitality to surge and boil within them. That was not all. They also began to spin in circles at a high speed, with their bodies connected together from end to end. In the beginning, their figures could still be seen, however, they soon blurred into a rapidly rotating blur. Something could vaguely be seen amidst the rapidly spinning circle of light, as though being summoned into existence. Many of the royal lords in the Black Ink clan army couldn't help feeling uncomfortable at the sight. Although they did not know what the two divine dragons were attempting, they knew that their actions would undoubtedly be detrimental to the Black Ink clan. They had to stop the divine dragons at all costs, hence, more than a dozen royal lords immediately rushed towards the two divine dragons from various directions. Despite their efforts though, another shocking scene entered their eyes before they could approach the divine dragons. Under the joint efforts of the two divine dragons, a large amount of turbid liquid suddenly gushed out from the dazzling circle of light. The unknown liquid splattered across the void like a spray of mist from a mountain spring, covering everything around them. Then, a torrent of water emerged and swept out in all directions. Many of the divine spirits who knew what was happening couldn't help feeling moved by the scene before them. They knew that the Dragon Clan had brought out their strongest trump card in order to obtain victory in this war. The torrent gushing into the void without restraint was clearly the waters from the Dragon Pool. The Phoenix Clan had the Phoenix Nest, while the Dragon Clan had the Dragon Pool. These were the foundations of their respective clans. When the Phoenix Clan mobilized the power of the Phoenix Nest against their enemies, the Dragon Clan had not unleashed the power of the Dragon Pool. It was not that the Dragon Clan did not want to bring out their trump card, but rather that they lacked the ability to perform such a feat under normal circumstances. The act of summoning the Dragon Pool would have required various complicated rituals in addition to the concerted efforts of many Dragon Clan members. Unfortunately, the Dragon Clan simply could not afford the time and energy to perform such intricate rites on such a crisis-ridden battlefield. That was the case until Yang Xiao became a divine dragon. With Fu Guang's cooperation, the two divine dragons joined hands and forcibly summoned the Dragon Pool to the battlefield. The Dragon Pool was the foundation of the Dragon Clan. After all, the existence of the Dragon Pool was the prerequisite for the Dragon Clan to produce endless descendants. Not to mention, the power of the Dragon Pool was diligently accumulated over countless generations of the Dragon Clan. Regardless of whether the war would end in victory or defeat today, the Dragon Clan would inevitably suffer unimaginable losses by summoning the Dragon Pool on such a chaotic battlefield. It would be impossible to restore the lost energy without several hundreds of thousands of years of recuperation. Nevertheless, there was no denying that the effects of summoning the Dragon Pool were remarkable. The waters of the Dragon Pool turned into a raging torrent that swept out in all directions, and the Black Ink clan soldiers caught within this flood instantly perished. The power of the Dragon Pool was an unstoppable force. If a dragon bearing the Dragon Clan bloodline came into contact with the Dragon Pool's waters, they would be able to enhance their bloodline and increase their strength. On the contrary, the waters of the Dragon Pool were a lethal poison to living creatures without the power of a dragon vein in their bodies. Everywhere the mighty current flowed, death followed. Even one of the royal lords rushing towards the two divine dragons who accidentally got caught in the current only managed to struggle for a few breaths before he dissolved into the rampaging waters. It was a grand display of the terrifying power within the mighty current of the Dragon Pool. Needless to say, the current did not pose any threat to beings like the royal lords and the territory lords as long as they remained on guard. The power emanating from the Dragon Pool might be impressive, but powerful masters only needed to avoid the waters by a certain margin to remain unaffected. However, it was never Fu Guang's intention to target the enemy masters when he joined forces with Yang Xiao to summon the Dragon Pool. His goal had always been the Black Ink clan army. The royal lords and the territory lords could easily dodge the raging currents, but the Black Ink clan soldiers weaker than the territory lords were not so capable. Therefore, the troops of the Black Ink clan army were now perishing in droves. Some small stone race members fighting the Black Ink clan army were also caught in the raging torrent, but this couldn't be helped. Although Fu Guang had done his best to summon the Dragon Pool in an area where only the Black Ink clan was heavily concentrated, he could not exert fine control over the direction in which the mighty current of the Dragon Pool would flow, hence, accidental injuries among friendly troops was inevitable. What shocked him though was that the small stone race members caught in the raging torrent of the Dragon Pool did not lose their lives. On the contrary, they simply struggled in the current for some time before they quickly rushed out and resumed fighting. After pondering on it for a moment though, Fu Guang realized what had happened. These small stone race soldiers might be simple-minded, but their bodies contained a significant amount of power from the burning light and serene glimmer. Even if the power of the dragon pool was both ancient and pure, it was still incomparable to the original powers of yin and yang born alongside the universe. The realization completely relieved Fu Guang of his worries. With hindsight, he had to admit that summoning the dragon pool at such a perilous juncture had been a stroke of genius. Following the raging torrent that swept out in all directions, the Black Ink clan army suffered enormous losses, completely eliminating the numerical advantage they originally held. On the other hand, the human race army was small in number and extremely agile in their movements, hence, it was not difficult for them to avoid the mighty current under Mi Jing Luan's command. As for the small stone race, only their formations were scattered by the impact while they did not suffer any actual casualties. After a while, the dragon pool vanished without a trace. The release of the waters that the dragon pool had accumulated over countless eons instantly changed the entire situation on the battlefield. It was finally time for a counterattack of the allied army of the human and the small stone races. Among the remaining Black Ink clan army, all the royal lords wore solemn expressions on their faces. They simply could not understand this sudden turn of events. How did the Black Ink clan, who should have had an absolute numerical advantage, end up in such dire condition all of a sudden? Without sufficient numerical advantage, it was impossible for the Black Ink clan to be a match for the allied army of the human race and the small stone race. To make matters worse, that terrifying woman was also beginning to take action again. After the three divine spirits advanced to the ninth order in quick succession, they immediately charged into the battlefield to resolve the most critical crises. Zhang Ruoxi finally had the chance to catch her breath as a result. She had watched the entire chain of events unfolding before her, beginning with the dragon pool's summoning, the raging current sweeping out across the battlefield, and finally, the Black Ink clan soldiers being washed away and vanishing from existence. Tightening her grip around the Heaven's Order sword, she murmured under her breath, "Seniors, I'm heading into battle." Big Brother Huang sighed softly, like he wanted to make a comment, but in the end, he said nothing and silently cooperated with Big Sister Lan to help Zhang Ruoxi maintain the balance of power in her body. The Heaven's Order bloodline burned once more, and the wings behind Zhang Ruoxi's back glowed with a blue and yellow hue. She charged into the battlefield without hesitation, aiming directly at the royal lords besieging Ada and Aer. At this moment, the pressure faced by the allied army on the main battlefield was not that serious. In fact, they were beginning to gain the upper hand. That was why Zhang Ruoxi did not head for the main battlefield. She would not last much longer in battle, so there was no point in slaughtering some miscellaneous Black Ink clan troops with what little time she had left. It was undoubtedly more cost-efficient to spend her limited strength slaughtering some royal lords instead. Besides, Ada and Aer would be freed as long as she killed enough royal lords. The allied army of the human race and the small stone race would also receive the support of the two giant spirit gods if she succeeded, which might be more effective than providing support by herself. In a flash of yellow and blue, Zhang Ruoxi entered the range of the battle where Ada and Aer were located. At this moment, the royal lords besieging the two giant spirit gods were forced to suffer in silence. The royal lords besieging Zhang Ruoxi had been completely eradicated, and the numerical advantage of the Black Ink clan army on the main battlefield was quickly being overturned. At this point, the human race army had gained the upper hand in this battle. Even if the royal lords fighting the two giant spirit gods wanted to help their comrades, they did not dare to leave their positions easily. They were only able to keep the two giant spirit gods in check by relying on sufficient numbers to harass them. If any of them stepped away from their position, there was a risk that the delicate balance would be broken. Once the two giant spirit gods broke free of their restraints, it would be impossible to pin them down again. However, it was evident that Zhang Ruoxi was coming to help the two giant spirit gods. The royal lords would only be waiting for their imminent deaths if they continued to confront the two giant spirit gods, but showing their backs to these three terrifying enemies would likely just result in them dying faster. At this point, they were stuck in a situation with no hope of escape. Any choice they made would result in a tragic end, thus, every one of them felt aggrieved and hopeless. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5994, Final Burst of Strength. The Black Ink clan's plans to use the royal lords to keep the two giant spirit gods under control failed as soon as Zhang Ruoxi came to the latter's aid. With a flash of her sword, several royal lords perished on the spot. Upon receiving Zhang Ruoxi's assistance, air immediately struck out at the same time. He reached out his hand and smacked at a royal lord who was hovering around him. Thanks to air's heaven-destroying, earth-shattering strength, the royal lord struck by his blow was instantly smashed to pieces. However, air paid a heavy price for his actions. The other royal lords immediately took the opportunity to leave numerous wounds on his body, causing blood and flesh to splatter everywhere. Nevertheless, air did not back down. Abandoning all defenses, he switched to a violent offensive instead. As time passed, the royal lords steadily perished. When the number of royal lords besieging air dropped to half their original number, the restraints and shackles holding him down could no longer be sustained. Air was freed. Afterwards, his offensive became increasingly violent and vicious. He worked together with Zhang Ruoxi to quickly slaughter a few more royal lords around him, and as a result, the remaining royal lords could no longer withstand the pressure of the assault and scattered in various directions. Zhang Ruoxi and air did not give chase but instead took the opportunity to rush towards Ada. A feeling of doom washed over the royal lords at this sight. Zhang Ruoxi had resolved air's predicament by killing off many of the royal lords in the encirclement with her strength alone. And now, she was joining forces with air to attack the remaining royal lords. How were they supposed to survive this onslaught? Seeing that the situation was not looking good for them, the royal lords besieging Ada hastily abandoned their opponent and fled in all directions. Ada naturally flew into a rage and chased after the fleeing royal lords, but his movements were slow and clumsy due to his enormous size, so how could he catch up to them? In the end, he was stopped by air. At this point, Ada had practically lost his ability to think rationally and was acting purely on his instincts. Thus, he immediately turned around and punched out. The punch caused air to stagger and lose his balance. Fortunately, Ada realized that he had attacked the wrong person after the first strike and his anger immediately vanished. He then stood there awkwardly scratching his head. Among the two giant spirit gods, Ada had always been the most simple-minded. In comparison, there was no doubt that air was the smarter one. That was also why Zhang Ruoxi had decided to rescue air first when she had the opportunity to help them. "Come with me, we'll beat them up together." Air told Ada, then he turned around and charged towards the main battlefield. Ada obediently followed after his brother, quickly forgetting about how he was bullied by the royal lords earlier. On the main battlefield, the appearance of the three ninth-order divine spirits and the mighty current of the dragon pool had long since leveled the gap in military strength between the two sides. These changes allowed the allied army to gain the upper hand in the battle over time. Moreover, their advantage swiftly widened when the two giant spirit gods came forward to provide support. Everything had gotten better, and the situation was bound to improve even more. On the other side, Zhang Ruoxi was relentlessly chasing down the fleeing royal lords. Her speed was extraordinary. With the slightest flap of her wings, she could ignore the barriers of space and appear before any one of the royal lords in an instant. None survived the slash of the Heaven's Order sword. 1, 2, 5, 10. The royal lords who scattered and fled in all directions had no hope of surviving. On the contrary, their actions simply accelerated the arrival of their demise. When the royal lords finally realized their mistake, they hastily gathered together once more. Unfortunately, there were only some 40 royal lords remaining at this point. These royal lords were originally responsible for surrounding and besieging the giant spirit gods. There had been more than 100 of them in the beginning, but more than half had perished in such a short span of time. Having seen the situation on the main battlefield, they knew that the Black Ink clan had already lost the battle, but so what? As long as they had the Supreme One, they would never be defeated. What they needed to do now was preserve their strength as much as possible. When the Supreme One finished dealing with whatever matters it had to, they would rule the universe under the command of the Supreme One. With these considerations in mind, the royal lords gathered together but did not attack Zhang Ruoxi. They simply waited quietly and assumed a defensive posture. Holding the Heaven's Order sword in both hands, Zhang Ruoxi smiled slightly even though her complexion was as pale as a sheet. Their response perfectly aligned with her desires. If they had scattered and fled in different directions, then she would not have been able to eliminate them all. On the contrary, the fact that they gathered together in one place had certainly saved her the trouble of hunting them down. Needless to say, the situation was also a risk to her. If she failed to handle the situation properly, she would most likely suffer catastrophic consequences. Come. Zhang Ruoxi exhaled lightly and stabilized the power in her body. When she looked up, the vitality surrounding her began to boil and burn and she transformed into a stream of light that charged towards the royal lords. This was her last burst of strength, so she had to act swiftly. She had to finish dealing with these royal lords before the situation fell out of control. When the stream of light crashed into the royal lords, various howls of fury resounded. Blood splattered everywhere and dismembered limbs scattered across the void. Under the rain of sword slashes that ruthlessly came pouring down, the royal lords perished one after another. The entire incident seemed to last for only a brief moment, but at the same time, there was also a feeling that hundreds of thousands of years had passed in that brief moment. When Zhang Ruoxi finally stopped swinging her sword, the void was littered with the dismembered remains of the royal lords. The few survivors opposite her looked petrified. Those short few moments had deeply instilled the true meaning of despair in their hearts. In the face of absolute might, even royal lords like themselves were as weak as ants. Nevertheless, something unexpected occurred. Under the horrified gazes of the royal lords, Zhang Ruoxi's hands suddenly fell limply to the sides. The vitality that enveloped her body also became extremely weak at this moment. On the other hand, the terrifying aura within her became increasingly intense and unstable. She's at her limits. One of the royal lords yelled in pleasant surprise. The royal lords had extremely keen vision, so they immediately noticed the changes when Zhang Ruoxi showed abnormal symptoms. At this moment, the few surviving royal lords finally glimpsed an opportunity to defeat this woman, hence, they charged forward without hesitation. A sharp look flashed through Zhang Ruoxi's eyes, and she struggled to lift the Heaven's Order sword up again. Big Brother Huang's anxious shout entered her ears at that moment, "You'll die at this rate." A faint smile appeared on her face, but her hands did not loosen their grip on the sword, instead tightening even more as she answered calmly, "We all have a predestined time." Big Sister Lan called out anxiously, "If you die, Big Brother Huang's and my power will surely go out of control. Are you willing to watch this place turn into another chaotic dead territory?" There was no denying that Big Sister Lan was much better at reading hearts when it came to persuading others. Zhang Ruoxi was not afraid of death. If her death could bring victory to the human race, she would sacrifice herself without a second thought. However, there would be catastrophic consequences if she lost her life here. Without the coordination of the Heaven's Order bloodline, the power of the two ancient supreme beings would definitely spiral out of control. The enormous void would become another chaotic dead territory in an instant. If that were to happen, the Black Ink clan army would surely be eradicated, but unfortunately, the human race army scattered across the battlefield would also be dragged down with them. The human race had been fighting for millions of years just to obtain peace. At this point, they were only one step away from the dream of so many generations. How could Zhang Ruoxi destroy everything at such a critical moment? Martial Peak, Chapter 5995, It's Not Enough. After a brief hesitation, Zhang Ruoxi abruptly retreated. She no longer dared to carelessly activate the power within her, therefore, she could only avoid the attacks of the royal lords who were charging forward desperately. Seeing that, the royal lords pursued Zhang Ruoxi even more fiercely than before. Ripples suddenly spread out across the void, and in the next moment, a dark blue ice phoenix wrapped in a bone-chilling cold stepped out from the ripples and shot a blast of icy aura at the royal lords who were pursuing Zhang Ruoxi. The royal lords were startled by the unexpected arrival and quickly dodged. When they raised their heads once more, their hearts ran cold with fear. Following the appearance of the ice phoenix, several other figures stepped out from the ripples. They were none other than the Ninth Order human masters. The Allied army had completely seized the initiative on the main battlefield. They marched forward in high spirits, with their overwhelming advantage in battle steadily growing larger. Under such circumstances, the outcome of the battle was no longer in question. Their victory was only a matter of time at this point. It was for that reason that Mi Jingluan immediately sent reinforcements when he noticed Zhang Ruoxi's predicament. For the sake of ensuring Zhang Ruoxi's safety, he did not even hesitate to mobilize Su Yan, who had only just become a Ninth Order divine spirit. After repelling the royal lords who were pursuing Zhang Ruoxi, a flash of light appeared around the ice phoenix. The figure shrank rapidly to reveal Su Yan's appearance. She took a step forward and came to Zhang Ruoxi's side. Grabbing Zhang Ruoxi by the arm, she quickly made a few maneuvers and withdrew from the battlefield. Her next task was to protect Zhang Ruoxi until the battle ended. Once Su Yan retreated from the battlefield with Zhang Ruoxi, the Ninth Order masters promptly found an opponent for themselves and clashed with the surviving royal lords. As time passed, powerful auras were eliminated one after another. The masters from the Black Ink clan suffered heavy casualties, and the Black Ink clan army was steadily being eradicated. The small stone race army also suffered terrible casualties, but even their deaths played a huge role in the battle. From time to time, flashes of dazzling light would burst out across the battlefield. Those flashes were none other than purifying light. Everywhere the light illuminated, Black Ink's strength dissipated and Black Ink clansmen howled in agony. The royal lords and territory lords were perishing all over, and this only accelerated with the destruction of the Black Ink clan army. At a certain moment, the last stubborn royal lord was finally eliminated. The remaining human race army looked around and realized that there were no other enemies around. The battle that lasted for several months with almost no time for respite finally ended with the victory of the Allied army. The small stone race army had suffered a heavy price for the victory. At this moment, less than 30% of their original numbers remained. As for the human race army, about 10 million troops remained when the entire human race army assembled together in one place. Even the number of Ninth Order masters had reduced by more than half. Among the Ninth Order masters who lost their lives in battle, most of them were those who advanced recently. Although they managed to break through to the Ninth Order open heaven realm, they barely had any time to stabilize and strengthen the foundation. Compared to the veteran Ninth Order masters, their heritage and control over their own strength was undoubtedly weaker by a significant margin. Furthermore, there were also many injured and crippled among the survivors. The price of victory was extremely heavy, but the victory was ultimately worth the sacrifices. A heaven-shattering burst of cheers rang out soon after. The survivors screamed and rejoiced at the top of their voices, reveling in the ecstasy that overflowed from their hearts. Meanwhile, unlike the ordinary soldiers, the higher-ups in the human race army knew that this war was not over. Although they had finally eradicated the entirety of the Black Ink clan that escaped from the primordial heaven source grand restriction, as long as Mo, the source of the Black Ink clan, was still alive, the Black Ink clan could rise once more. Despite fighting for months, Mo had never appeared on the battlefield. Yang Kai had not shown up either. It could be conceived that these two were battling each other somewhere in the depths of the void, and the outcome of their clash would determine the ultimate fate of the universe. Nobody knew the situation in the depths of the void. Zhang Ruoxi had indeed exchanged blows with Mo for a period, but so much time had passed since then that she could no longer judge the situation on the other side. For that reason, the Allied army only took a brief moment to rest and reorganize their formation after their victory. Then, they began marching into the depths of the void in hopes of helping Yang Kai. there was only one piece of good news that could be confirmed. Yang Kai was definitely alive. That was because they could sense a series of disturbances that were caused by a battle somewhere deep in the void. Those disturbances could only mean that Yang Kai currently had the capital to exchange blows with Mo. Passing through the site where the primordial heaven source Grand Restriction was originally located, the human race army was shocked by the sight that greeted their eyes. There were countless black ink nests scattered throughout the void. Moreover, precious high-rank black ink nests could be found everywhere. It was just that there was no sign of activity from any black ink clansmen, even though there were so many black ink nests. Having dispatched all their military strength to the battlefield for the earlier battle, the Black Ink clan had been completely wiped out as a result. These black ink nests were nothing more than decorations now. However, what shocked the human race army was not the countless black ink nests scattered everywhere, but the gigantic figures dispersed throughout the void. Those figures were none other than black ink giant spirit gods. The outcome of the previous battle would have been even harder to determine if the Black Ink clan had dispatched these black ink giant spirit gods to the battlefield. In fact, there was a high possibility that the battle would have ended with the defeat of the allied army. Fortunately, the black ink giant spirit gods were soul clones of Mo, so Mo had to inject a strand of his soul into these behemoths to make them move. Without a strand of Mo's soul, these black ink giant spirit gods were nothing more than empty shells. There was nothing the Black Ink clan could do about the black ink giant spirit gods even if they wanted to mobilize them. After passing through the void where the primordial heaven source Grand Restriction was previously located, the allied army increased their pace. However, Mi Jingluan's expression grew increasingly solemn as they steadily marched forward. He originally brought the allied army with the intention of helping Yang Kai, but he also knew that Mo was extremely powerful. The rumors claimed that Mo had reached the legendary creation realm. Even if the allied army boasted massive numbers, they might not be of much help to Yang Kai. Be that as it may, he was currently faced with a dilemma. At present, it was no longer a question of whether the allied army could provide any help to Yang Kai, but whether the allied army could even continue their forward march under the current circumstances. As they marched forward, the shockwaves from the battle up ahead became increasingly terrifying. Even now, the mere fallout was enough to shake the entire void. The countless ripples that constantly spread out from the depths of the void were powerful enough to warp space despite their origin being beyond the horizon. Mi Jingluan soon realized that the intensity of the battle between Yang Kai and Mo was unprecedented. At this rate, it was evident that the allied army would not be of any help. That was because they did not even have the qualification to approach the battlefield. If they forced their way forward, they would be crushed by the fallout before they even arrived. After considering the situation for a time, Mi Jingluan made a decisive decision. He ordered the allied army to remain on standby at their current position. Then, he brought only the masters in or stronger than the Ninth Order with him and resumed their trek to the depths of the void. The small group traveled for some time before the situation on the battlefield finally came into view, but the sight that entered their eyes stopped them cold in their tracks and turned them pale with horror. It did not matter whether they were a Ninth Order master or a Ninth Order divine spirit. Even Ada and Air were no exception. Yang Kai stood in the void with the azure dragon spear in his hand. There seemed to be a small and slender spirit snake wrapped around the body of the spear. In addition, every thrust of his spear contained a heaven-destroying, earth-shattering force. The spirit snake was the manifestation of his space-time river. He had completely refined and absorbed Mu's space-time river into his body now, and although he was robbed of many benefits by Mo during the process, the benefits he gained had already pushed him to his limits. Hence, the fact that Mo had stolen some of the benefits did not affect the overall situation by much. The stolen benefits had only restored some of Mo's strength at most. The spirit snake wrapped around the azure dragon spear was Yang Kai's space-time river. It was the result he obtained after countless near-death encounters with Mo. The ability to condense the space-time river into this shape undoubtedly indicated that he had complete control over the power of the space-time river. The intensity and ferocity of this battle were something Yang Kai had never experienced before either. The slightest negligence would lead to his death, and he had indeed suffered several near-death experiences because of Mo. It was fortunate that he had always managed to avoid the worst outcome at the last moment. Mo's vicious attacks had allowed Yang Kai to rapidly gain control over the power of his spacetime river. He had been no match for Mo in the beginning, but it had only taken him a few days to reach his current mastery. Originally, Yang Kai could only absorb the Tao strengths into his body by force. When he devoured and refined Mu's spacetime river, he had swallowed Mu's spacetime river whole and did his best to grasp as much of Mu's last gift as possible. If the Yang Kai from then was compared to a piece of raw ore, then his battles with Mo had been various forms of tempering and refinement. Every application of Tao strengths and every encounter with Mo had gradually increased his control over the power of the spacetime river. The rough and ugly ore had been forged into a fine piece of metal now. At this moment, Yang Kai's understanding of the 10,000 Tao strengths had truly reached the peak of enlightenment. The strength he could now exert was no weaker than what Zhang Ruo she had previously displayed at her peak. Unfortunately, it was still not enough. If he wanted to slaughter Mo, then he had to overcome his limits in the Ninth Order Open Heaven realm and advance into a higher realm. Only then would he have hope of victory. However, his heritage was insufficient. How could Yang Kai easily overcome his limitations under these circumstances? Not even Mu could achieve such a feat. The more perfectly he could control his powers, the more aware Yang Kai became of his shortcomings. He couldn't reach a higher level of the martial Tao in such a short span of time. He would need to spend long years of precipitation and accumulation before he could ascend. Therefore, he sank into a vicious loop. As long as he failed to overcome his limitations, he would not be able to slaughter Mo. If he wanted to break through to a higher realm of the martial Tao, he would require more time. But, how could Mo allow him to have enough time to grow and develop? Ever since Yang Kai condensed his spacetime river in the universe furnace, he had found his path to the future. It was just that he failed to realize his discovery until Mu pointed it out to him. Although he could now oppose Mo to a certain extent, he knew in his heart that this situation would not last for long. There were times when one simply lacked the necessary strength, and he was bound to become exhausted at some point. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of Mo. Mo was a strange existence that was born when heaven and earth split apart. As long as his source remained intact, his strength would never be depleted. Furthermore, he was supposedly in the creation realm already. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he was still a mighty being in a realm above the open heaven realm. Yang Kai had finally seen the bizarre means of a being in that realm. Black ink strength that permeated the void could be transformed into a royal lord with a single touch from Mo. The ability to create something out of thin air was simply unimaginable. It was truly fortunate that Yang Kai's current strength was extraordinary, so even a royal lord would only pose a minimal threat to him. That was why Mo stopped using such ineffective tactics after a few attempts and decided to fight Yang Kai with his own strength instead. With each vicious exchange of blows, the violent aftermath that spread out in all directions caused the void to shudder and crack. During one of their confrontations, Yang Kai suddenly heard a slight sound coming from deep within his heart. At the same time, a strange sensation was also transmitted from his arm. Looking down at his arm, he couldn't help being shocked by the sight. A crack had appeared on the as till now indestructible azure dragon spear. Martial Peak, Chapter 5996, Defeat. The azure dragon spear was given to Yang Kai by Ada when he was still living in the star boundary. In other words, the spear had accompanied him for thousands of years, during which they experienced numerous battles and slaughtered countless enemies together. As the spear was an artifact refined from the body of a divine, its grade was so high that it was practically unmatched. Be that as it may, Mo had managed to cause a crack to appear in such an amazing spear. It was easy to imagine the intensity of this battle. After all, even the body of a divine dragon could not withstand the force of Mo's attacks. After the first crack appeared on the spear, a second and third crack quickly followed. It did not take long before the entire body of the spear was covered in fine cracks. The spear was on the verge of shattering to pieces. When Mo noticed the cracks on the spear, a hint of mockery appeared in his eyes and his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Yang Kai suppressed the reluctance in his heart and summoned his Tao strengths with all his might. Then, he thrust out with his spear. As soon as the violent forces collided with each other, the impact caused his body to freeze for a moment. The spear that had accompanied him for thousands of years simultaneously shattered into 1,000,000 pieces in his hand. Mo had been waiting for this very opportunity. When the azure dragon spear shattered to pieces, he jumped forward and punched Yang Kai. This punch was meant to become the deciding factor of this battle. He strongly believed that Yang Kai would be forced to avoid his blows after losing his weapon. If that was the case, then he could steadily press forward and gain complete control over the flow of the battle until Yang Kai became powerless to fight back. Contrary to expectations though, Yang Kai did not retreat from the blow even after the azure dragon spear shattered to pieces. The spacetime river, which was originally wrapped around the body of the spear, seemed to have gained spirituality and clung tightly to his arms. Facing Mo's attack directly, Yang Kai threw a punch in Mo's direction. The Tao strengths fluctuated violently. At the moment when both forces collided with each other, a powerful impact manifested as a visible halo of light centered around the two opponents flashed. The halo of light swiftly spread out in all directions. Everywhere the light passed, space shattered and collapsed. It was quickly followed by the appearance of numerous enormous void cracks. The Ninth Order masters who had arrived at the periphery of the battlefield turned pale with fright. Faced with the approaching fallout of the battle, they quickly summoned their strength to defend themselves against the impact. Nevertheless, they were still sent flying. They, who were no longer at their peak strength, were instantly thrown into disarray by the impact. Luckily, the two giant spirit gods stood in front of them and bore the brunt of the shockwave. It was only thanks to the protection of Ada and Aer that there were no casualties. Once the effects of the aftermath passed, they couldn't help looking slightly flustered and bitter. They originally came here intending to help Yang Kai. Halfway into the journey, the Allied army was forced to stop at a distance and discontinue their forward march because the troops could not withstand the overwhelming pressure of the battle. At this moment, they were horrified to discover that even Ninth Order masters like themselves could not approach the battlefield. They would be torn apart by the aftermath of such powerful attacks. As things stood, the only ones who could be depended upon were the two giant spirit gods, Ada and Aer. Mi Jingluan looked up at the two behemoths and instantly realized that the two giant spirit gods could not be counted on either. The survivors were exhausted after the arduous battle. Even Ada and Aer were no exception. While the two giant spirit gods managed to resist the shockwave just now, they were still pushed back significantly by the impact. Under these circumstances, it was impossible for any of them to intervene in the battle. They would only be a burden for Yang Kai if they recklessly charged forward. Mi Jingluan was abruptly struck by a saddening realization. The only thing they could do after coming here was to witness the unique battle with their own eyes. That was an unimaginably heartbreaking truth. When the aftermath fully dissipated, everyone looked towards the battlefield from behind Ada and Aer. The scene that greeted them made their hearts tighten with fear. Yang Kai was steadily being pushed back, seemingly at a complete disadvantage. Compared to an ancient entity like Mo, Yang Kai's heritage was simply too shallow. The slightest negligence or careless mistake could become fatal. Waste. During the battle, Mo suddenly yelled in frustration. Yang Kai flew backwards like an arrow released from the bowstring following a vicious strike. The spacetime river wrapped around his arms suddenly emerged behind him and he fell into the river, diffusing some of the impacts from the blow. It did not take long before he stepped out of the river once more. His complexion was pale, and a trickle of blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. Mo did not pursue Yang Kai. He simply stared coldly and calmly stated, "My offer from before still stands. Give up your feudal resistance and hand over Mu's inheritance. I guarantee that the human race will have a place to live in the future." Yang Kai turned his head to the side and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he grinned wickedly, "Kill me, then you can deal with the human race as you please." Mo closed his eyes gently. When he opened them once more, his murderous intent overflowed. He did not bother to speak again, and his figure abruptly vanished from where he was standing. By the time he reappeared again, he was already standing in front of Yang Kai. The sudden disappearance and reappearance were not a trick of space principles, rather, his speed had simply reached such an extreme. Yang Kai did not seem surprised by these movements. With a backward grab, the space-time river that was originally flowing behind him transformed into a whip and appeared in his hand. The long whip then lashed out towards Mo. Mo frowned slightly but did not dodge aside, he simply threw a punch instead. The punch struck Yang Kai squarely in the head. The blow made his head arch backwards, and his skull seemed to crack from the impact. He was immediately drenched in blood. Nevertheless, the long whip wrapped around Mo. Standing so close to each other, the blood-drenched Yang Kai grinned at Mo. "I finally caught you." He seemed to have been waiting for this moment. After he finished speaking, he gave the long whip in his hand a sharp flick. The space-time river manifested once more, and the raging currents instantly engulfed the two figures. Before their figures vanished from view, the masters standing in the distance vaguely heard Mo's mocking voice sounding in their ears, "Since you're so eager to die, I will fulfill your wishes." Afterwards, the space-time river that stretched out into the void suddenly boiled and bubbled violently. Meanwhile, the Grand Tao strengths trembled agitatedly. These were the results of the battle between Yang Kai and Mo in the space-time river. The Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters couldn't help being extremely nervous at the sight. The space-time river was the condensed crystallization of Yang Kai's 10,000 Grand Taos. Even if fighting in the space-time river would give him a considerable advantage over his opponent, that was not enough to overcome the fact that Mo's cultivation was in a higher realm than his. Besides, the Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters had seen the previous battle with their own eyes. Under Mo's powerful offensive, Yang Kai could only parry and defend at most. He had no strength to fight back whatsoever. That was the result of the undeniable gap in their strengths. Rashly dragging his enemy into the space-time river was both an opportunity and a danger. If he failed to defeat Mo in the space-time river, then he would not be able to guarantee his own safety in the space-time river. The churning of the river waters became increasingly turbulent. Waves rose and fell, splashing around fiercely. At the same time, countless Tao strengths appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Although the Ninth Order Masters could not see the ongoing battle, they could deduce that Yang Kai was at a disadvantage just by looking at the changes in the space-time river. The situation lasted for several days. The Ninth Order Masters were about to rush forward to help when the churning river suddenly turned calm. With their hearts in their throats, they watched the space-time river intently. They knew that the outcome of the battle had been decided. Mi Jing Luan immediately sent a transmission to his companions, ordering them to be ready for action at any time. A figure suddenly stepped out of the river. To their horror, the figure that stepped out turned out to be not one but two figures. Mo held Yang Kai by the head, dragging him with one hand. Yang Kai hung limply from Mo's grasp as though every bone in his body had been broken. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5997, Spacetime's Shadow. Standing above the spacetime river, Mo held Yang Kai's head as though holding a chicken in his grasp and snorted, "Useless waste. You don't have the right to continue living." Then, he abruptly exerted great strength in his hand. How could Yang Kai, who had lost his ability to fight, withstand such an attack? His head instantly exploded from the impact. However, Mo did not stop there. It punched out and smashed the crippled body to pieces. The scene was imprinted in the eyes of the Ninth Order Masters who were watching the battle from afar. They stood frozen in shock and stared in disbelief. Yang Kai died? The man who was the best at creating miracles and turning the tides of war countless times? The man who had saved the human race from various catastrophes? Did he die just like that? They instinctively refused to believe the scene before them and subconsciously wondered whether they were looking at an illusion. However, the dissipation of his aura that followed the destruction of his body could not be faked. Everything indicated that he was really dead. Yang Kai had died at the hands of Mo. Only a short moment had passed from the time Yang Kai was dragged out of the spacetime river by Mo. Moreover, Mo had not hesitated in the slightest when he killed Yang Kai. Everything happened so quickly that the Ninth Order Masters had no time to even think about rescuing Yang Kai. A shrill but mournful phoenix cry rang out, accompanied by a furious dragon roar. Su Yan and Yang Xiao transformed into their divine spirit forms and charged towards Mo. The rest of the Ninth Order Masters also followed suit and sprang into action. Despite knowing that they were no match for Mo, nobody hesitated in the slightest. Now that Yang Kai was dead, there was nobody in this world who could compete with Mo. Black Ink's strength would soon gain complete control over the universe. When that happened, the human race would no longer have a place to live. This was the final struggle. Su Yan was the fastest. After all, the Tao of Space was the bloodline talent of the Phoenix clan. She had lost her mind after being consumed by her feelings of rage and sorrow. At this moment, there was only one thought left in her heart. She wanted revenge, and if she could not have it, she would accompany Yang Kai to the afterlife. A gorgeous trail of light lingered behind the enormous blue figure. With a few flickers, she arrived on the battlefield. However, a bizarre phenomenon occurred before she could unleash her strength. Ripples suddenly emerged in the originally calm spacetime river. Following the splashing waves, a figure leapt out. Upon seeing the appearance of the figure, Su Yan froze in shock. Even the Ninth Order Masters behind her were dumbfounded by the sight. The figure who stepped out from the spacetime river was none other than Yang Kai, who should have been killed by Mo earlier. He's alive. Everybody stared at the scene in front of them in disbelief. Their reactions were similar to when they watched Yang Kai being killed just now. He had clearly died right before their very eyes, and his death had not been an illusion. Nevertheless, he just walked out of the spacetime river alive. The bizarre phenomenon was beyond their comprehension. This kind of resurrection after death was simply impossible. After stepping out from the surging waves, Yang Kai immediately noticed Su Yan and the others. He seemed to have anticipated the current situation and breathed out deeply, "I'm glad I made it back in time." Step back. Su Yan, who had transformed into an ice phoenix, only hesitated for a brief moment before she turned around and retreated backwards. She also manipulated space principles and quickly transported the people behind her away from the battlefield. The Ninth Order Masters were forcefully returned to their previous positions. This location could barely be considered safe from the aftermath of the battle. Xiang Shan frowned deeply. What just happened? Yang Kai had clearly been killed, so how did he come back alive from the spacetime river? Although Xiang Shan had lived for many years, he had never encountered such a bizarre sight before. A light flashed through Mi Jing Luan's eyes. Creation realm. Could it be the mysteries of the creation realm? What do you mean? Oh, Yang Lai raised an eyebrow at those words. Are you saying that Yang Kai has stepped into the creation realm? Mi Jing Luan shook his head. It doesn't seem like it. The Yang Kai who stepped out of the spacetime river only had the aura of a Ninth Order Master. It did not seem as though he had ascended to a new realm. Be that as it may, Mi Jing Luan had no other explanation for the bizarre phenomenon that they just witnessed. What's more, could reaching the creation realm really allow one to revive from the dead? It was simply outrageous and inconceivable. On the battlefield, Missouri watched Yang Kai reappear from the spacetime river and turned to look at the scattered pieces of the dismembered body. After confirming that he had indeed slaughtered Yang Kai earlier, he immediately understood the situation. A shadow? Yang Kai smiled at Mo. I can't fool your eyes after all. Mu and Mo had lived together for such a long time. It was only natural for Mo to know about Mu's methods. Besides, two identical individuals could not exist together unless they originated from different spacetimes. Mu's shadow technique had transcended the limits of the mundane. In order to suppress and seal Mo's source, she had divided her entire life into 3,000 shadows to protect the 3,000 universe worlds inside her spacetime river. Each shadow represented a part of her past, an illusion of sorts that was also real and tangible. Yang Kai had obtained Mu's final gift. Devouring and refining her spacetime river had allowed him to massively increase the volume of his own spacetime river. At the same time, he also enhanced and improved his attainments and comprehension of the 10,000 grand Daos. The benefits he received were enormous. Nevertheless, those were not his greatest gains. The greatest benefit he obtained was Mu's shadow technique. That secret technique was definitely the pinnacle of the mysteries of the Grand Daos. After fighting Mo, Yang Kai had deeply understood that he was no match for his opponent. That was because he could not overcome his limits and advance to a higher realm within a short time. As long as he could not advance to a higher realm, then his battle with Mo would only end with his defeat and death. Be that as it may, he could not afford to die. The human race would be doomed if he fell here. Since he had no means to advance to the next realm within a short time, his only chance of victory was to master Mu's shadow technique. Just 1 or 2 of him could not compete with Mo, but what about 3 of him? Or 5? Or 10? Mastering the mysterious shadow technique was Yang Kai's only chance at defeating Mo. Therefore, he had mainly been buying time during his previous fight with Mo so that he could integrate the many Dao strengths into his body completely. Mu had not been able to teach Yang Kai about the mystery behind the shadow technique. It was not that she had no intention to teach him the secret technique, on the contrary, it was a secret technique that resulted from reaching the pinnacle of the Grand Daos, so it was not something he could learn even if she tried to teach him. The secret technique was something he had to comprehend with his own abilities. Fortunately, Yang Kai had embarked on the same path as Mu. It was for that reason she believed that he would eventually comprehend the mysterious secret technique and understand her intentions for giving him her spacetime river. Having come into contact with more than 2,000 of Mu's shadows, Yang Kai already had some vague ideas about the shadow technique before he devoured and refined Mu's spacetime river. Furthermore, Mu's final gift had laid down a solid foundation for him. It was thanks to the foundation that he finally understood the secrets of the shadow technique and was able to perform it through his spacetime river. There was no denying that Mo had killed him, but the one who died was a copy of himself who had existed at a certain time in the past. Nonetheless, the demise of a shadow was not without cost. Although it was Yang Kai's first time performing the shadow technique, he quickly noticed that something was wrong. He raised a hand to his head in confusion. It feels like I've forgotten something. He had completely lost his memories of the time during which the deceased shadow of him had existed. Never mind. It probably wasn't anything important. He gave a carefree laugh and looked up at Mo. Shall we go for round 2? Mo's lips curled upwards. His expression had been sullen throughout the battle with Yang Kai, as though he owed him a massive debt. He also repeatedly made rude and disparaging remarks, but he broke into a smile at this moment. Interesting. The interesting part has yet to come. As soon as the words left Yang Kai's mouth, the Dao strengths lingering around his body began to fluctuate. He arrived in front of Mo in the blink of an eye. The spacetime river surged behind him. Raising his arm, Yang Kai summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and thrust it at Mo. The Azure Dragon Spear should have been destroyed, but the Azure Dragon Spear and the spacetime that Yang Kai's shadow originated in remained intact. That was why the shattered spear could display its great strength once more. As before, the violent fallout produced by their exchange of blows continuously spread to the surroundings. The spectating Ninth Order masters couldn't help widening their eyes at the sight. They secretly rejoiced that Yang Kai had resurrected in time. With their strength, Mo would have effortlessly killed them if they had rushed forward at the time. It was initially assumed that Yang Kai would be able to persist for a long time even though the battle was not evenly matched in strength. After all, he had displayed his immense strength previously. Unexpectedly, the battle only lasted for 4 hours before Mo found an opening and slammed his fist into Yang Kai's chest. A gaping hole appeared in Yang Kai's chest, then his body exploded into pieces. His aura also swiftly dwindled away into nothing. Despite knowing that he would not experience a true death, the Ninth Order Masters could not help being overwhelmed by sorrow at the sight. After eradicating Yang Kai's second shadow, Mo raised his eyes to look in the direction of the space-time river. He had lived with Mu for such a long time, so he was well aware of the shadow technique's strength. The true strength of the secret technique was not power, but the prominent ability to survive that was granted to the users of the secret technique. The shadow technique was created based on the space-time river, so the foundation of the secret technique was the space-time river itself. In order to completely eradicate a user of the shadow technique, the space-time river must first be destroyed, otherwise, the user of the shadow technique would never perish. For that reason, Mo immediately aimed for the space-time river as soon as he slaughtered Yang Kai's second shadow. Black ink strength around his body surged to cover the entire river. He planned to corrupt the entire space-time river with black ink strength in order to destroy Yang Kai's shadow technique. But before Mo could make a move, another of Yang Kai's shadow jumped out of the space-time river. Yang Kai instantly summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and launched himself at Mo. He even made a mocking remark, "Why are you in such a hurry?" The two figures resumed their vicious battle once more. During that time, Yang Kai fought Mo while gathering various information on the shadow technique. It was his first time performing the secret technique, so his understanding of it was quite lacking. He had to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible because that was the only way he could turn the situation around and obtain victory. If he only relied on a never-ending series of battles via his shadows, he would never be able to defeat Mo. However, Yang Kai would need to make countless attempts and gain experience from actual practice to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible. "I've forgotten more things, but the memories I deliberately preserved have not been forgotten." "That's good news," Yang Kai quietly muttered to himself and resumed battle against Mo. Although he was no match for Mo still, he no longer needed to worry about death. That was why he could afford to act more recklessly than before. Shortly afterwards, Yang Kai gained another important piece of information: the shorter the span of spacetime allocated, the weaker the shadow's fighting ability. That is certainly worth noting. When that thought passed through his mind, the strength of his shadow faltered. Yang Kai showed weaknesses in his defenses, so Mo instantly found an opening and slaughtered him. Blood rained all over the void. Despite witnessing similar scenes on several occasions already, the Ninth Order Masters watching the battle from afar still widened their eyes at the sight. What reassured them was that the next Yang Kai had already leapt out of the spacetime river almost as soon as the previous Yang Kai died. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5998, Contribution from the Future. One after another, Yang Kai's shadows stepped out from the spacetime river only to perish at Mo's hands. There were no exceptions. The first one had survived the battle for over 4 hours. The second one lasted for less than 4 hours. As for the third, the battle had ended even faster. This is bad. Among those who were watching the battle from a distance, Mi Jingluan's expression turned solemn. He had noticed the issue at hand. It was an extremely serious issue. Although Yang Kai's shadows were endless in supply, his strength seemed to be weakening over time. It was as though time was flowing backwards for him, causing his condition to return to an earlier period with each shadow. At this moment, Yang Kai's aura was only comparable to a newly advanced Ninth Order Master, hence, he was effortlessly slaughtered by Mo as soon as he stepped out from the spacetime river. If the situation continued in this manner, he would not even be able to maintain his cultivation in the Ninth Order. If that were to happen, Mo would be able to exterminate him without even breaking a sweat, no matter how many shadows were to appear. Another one of Yang Kai's shadows in the newly advanced Ninth Order stepped out from the spacetime river. Raising a hand, Mo captured the shadow in its grasp and stared at Yang Kai faintly. "You're a disgrace to Mu's legacy." Yang Kai did not panic even though he was captured by Mo. After the repeated deaths of his shadows, he was now very familiar with the feeling of death. Raising an eyebrow at those words, he denied the statement. "That might not be true." Mo looked surprised. "Do you have another trick up your sleeve?" Yang Kai grinned. "Indeed, a trick you've never seen before." Very good. Mo made a faint smile. While saying so, he exerted some strength into his grip and crushed the shadow in his grasp. In the next moment, another Yang Kai leapt out from the space-time river. However, the aura lingering around him was different this time. Something had obviously changed, as his aura was once again at the peak of his strength. If the foundation of the shadow technique was said to be the space-time river, then the core of the secret technique was the user of the selected space-time. In Yang Kai's case, he was manipulating the 10,000 Dao strengths with his self from this space-time as the core and his space-time river as the foundation. That was how he gained the ability to summon shadows from previous space-time periods. All those who were slaughtered by Mo previously were his shadows. However, the one who walked out of the space-time river now was his main body. It was the him of the current space-time. The foundation and core were extremely important to the shadow technique, therefore, it was necessary to destroy both aspects to overcome it. Mo had initially wanted to refine the space-time river but was hindered by Yang Kai's numerous shadows, which prevented it from taking action. However, he saw a ray of hope when Yang Kai's main body emerged from the space-time river. The shadow technique would be destroyed as long as the Yang Kai standing before him was eliminated. But, could it be that simple? For Yang Kai's main body to emerge from the space-time river at this point. His actions certainly seemed like a desperate move. After all, the shadows that he summoned earlier had been cleanly eradicated. If he summoned any more shadows from earlier space-time periods, he would only have the cultivation of an 8th-order master, which would not be able to cause any trouble for Mo at all. Combining the situation with what Yang Kai mentioned just now, Mo had the vague feeling that Yang Kai was about to reveal his trump card. Oddly enough, he found himself looking forward to what was to come for some reason. Yang Kai did not disappoint. When his main body stepped out of the space-time river, he lightly chanted, "I offer 1,000 years of my past in exchange for a contribution from the future. Come." As soon as those words left his mouth, the space-time river behind him began to rumble turbulently. The enormous river abruptly shrunk by a large margin, then another of Yang Kai's shadow emerged from within the waters. Seeing this, Mo's eyes narrowed slightly. That was because the aura lingering around this shadow was slightly stronger than Yang Kai himself. That should have been impossible. It had to be said that the shadow technique was performed with one's self in the current spacetime as the core. For that reason, the summoned shadow could only be formed from one's self that existed in previous spacetimes. In other words, the summoned shadow should never be stronger than the main body, because the main body was ultimately the strongest. Be that as it may, an exception had appeared in Yang Kai's case. Mo instantly figured out the truth behind the situation and exclaimed in astonishment, "You summoned a shadow from the future." Only Yang Kai from the future could be stronger than the main body of Yang Kai, who existed in the current spacetime. Mo did not remain idle when he raised this question. After realizing that Yang Kai's attainments in the shadow technique had surpassed Mu's, he knew that Yang Kai could not be allowed to continue, so he charged forward even while asking this question. In response, Yang Kai just stood calmly in place. On the other hand, the summoned shadow stepped forward and immediately engaged in an intense battle with Mo. Although he came from 1,000 years in the future, his strength was still limited even though he was slightly stronger than the main body. He was no match for Mo either, but he would have no trouble buying some time for Yang Kai. Furthermore, Yang Kai did not need much time. He then shouted again, "Come." A second shadow stepped out from the spacetime river. It was another Yang Kai who came from another 1,000 years into the future. When the second shadow appeared, the size of the spacetime river shrunk again. On the other hand, the aura of Yang Kai and the two shadows instantly became closely interconnected. A three fortunes formation was established. The aura of the second shadow was again stronger than the first. The first shadow had been steadily pushed back by Mo's intense assault, but his situation improved as soon as the three fortunes formation was established even though he remained at a disadvantage. Again. Yang Kai shouted. The dragon blood in his body boiled and churned, while at the same time, his face began to flush red. A third shadow stepped out from the spacetime river. Glancing at the main body, he nodded lightly before he directly charged onto the battlefield. The Three Fortunes formation also instantly transformed into the Four Symbols formation. Again. Golden blood trickled out of Yang Kai's nose as a fourth shadow emerged and the Four Symbols formation evolved into a Five Elements formation. Shadow after shadow emerged from the spacetime river without pause. Only when the eighth shadow was summoned did Yang Kai finally stop. It was not that he no longer wanted to continue, but rather that the volume of his spacetime river would shrink by a certain extent whenever he summoned a shadow from the future, and the spacetime river had vanished completely after he summoned the eighth shadow. He had reached the absolute limit of his shadow technique. At this moment, Yang Kai's main body was bleeding from all 7 of his orifices. It was evident that he had endured tremendous pressure in order to pull this feat off. The shadows that appeared towards the end possessed increasingly powerful auras. When the 6th shadow emerged, its aura had already reached the absolute peak of the 9th order. It was a stage that even Yang Kai's main body had not achieved. The 7th and the 8th shadows also had auras at the peak of the 9th order, but their auras had become even more profound. Looking at Mo, who was being besieged and steadily repelled by the shadows on the battlefield, Yang Kai smiled even though he was covered in blood. In truth, the shadows were already capable of fighting Mo on an equal footing when the Six Paths formation was formed. Therefore, Mo's situation then became more and more critical when it later evolved to become the 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and ultimately 9 palaces formation. The ones who established the battle formation were all Yang Kais. To be more precise, they were Yang Kais from future spacetimes. This was a feat that even Mu could not achieve. Her shadow technique could only summon shadows of her past because her spacetime river was incomplete, but that was not the case for Yang Kai. His spacetime river had been perfected, so the power of the shadow technique he wielded was even more terrifying. Martial Peak, Chapter 5999, Clash of the Strongest. Each shadow represented a Yang Kai from subsequent 1,000-year periods in the future. In other words, the 8 shadows represented 8,000 years worth of future spacetime. These 8 shadows combined with Yang Kai's main body to establish the 9 palaces formation. For that reason, the power of the battle formation was even greater than the 9 palaces formation formed between Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guard. Zhang Ruoxi, who had harmonized the power of Yin and Yang with her Heaven's Order bloodline, was certainly stronger than any of Yang Kai's individual shadows. Be that as it may, the strength of the 8 personal guards had held her back. Taking the overall situation into account, Yang Kai's 9 palaces formation was undoubtedly the strongest 9 palaces formations that had appeared on the battlefield. Moreover, the difference in strength was significant. After establishing the 9 palaces formation, Yang Kai's main body took a step forward and charged towards Mo with the combined strength of the other 8 shadows. The 6 paths formation was already sufficient for Yang Kai to fight Mo on even terms, so the 7 stars formation and 8 trigrams formations had left Mo at a complete disadvantage. At this moment, Yang Kai was practically invincible thanks to the 9 palaces formation. With the combined forces of the main body and 8 shadows, Mo was powerless against their intense assault. Black blood and black ink strength splattered everywhere. The 9 Yang Kais moved around swiftly, each one of them having mastered the 10,000 Grand Daos. As they were shadows of Yang Kai himself, there was no need for them to worry about their cooperation. The connection between the shadows was so close and firm that there were no flaws in their movements at all. Mo naturally wanted to break free, but it was not easy to escape the besiegement of the battle formation. The Ninth Order Masters watching the battle from afar were stunned. Nobody could have imagined that such a strange scene would appear during the final battle. The mysteries of the shadow technique had exceeded their comprehension and imagination. Looking at the current situation, they couldn't help feeling hopeful and excited. That was because they finally saw a glimpse of hope in defeating Mo. In the past, the issue of defeating Mo had always been a plague to the human race. Although they never deliberately avoided the topic, the reality was that they simply did not have sufficient means or strength to oppose Mo Zhang Ruoxi's support had certainly been a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, even she was not strong enough to compete with Mo in battle. The battle on the main battlefield was over, and the entire Black Ink clan had been obliterated. If Yang Kai could defeat Mo, then the Black Ink crisis that had been plaguing the human race since the late ancient era would be resolved in one fell swoop. A bright future was awaiting the human race. The light would eventually expunge all darkness. However, the veteran Ninth Order masters soon began to look worried. The current situation might be favorable for them, but nobody knew what price Yang Kai had paid to wield the shadow technique like this. Seeing as the secret technique far exceeded his own abilities, the price he paid would correspond to the strength he obtained. In other words, the greater the strength Yang Kai obtained, the greater the price he had to pay. Furthermore, they did not know how long he could persevere in such an intense battle. The truth was just as they feared. Yang Kai had indeed paid an unimaginable price to wield the shadow technique in such a fashion. His body was also forced to bear the incredible pressure that came from obtaining strength that exceeded his own abilities. In other words, he could not maintain this state for long. He had to finish this battle as soon as possible, and for that reason, he did not hesitate to join the battle himself just to defeat Mo a little faster. Mo was steadily being pushed back under the suppression of the Nine Palaces formation. At this point, he was backed into a corner with no ability to fight back. The vexing situation infuriated Mo. As the ancient supreme being, he was a master who not only originated from the same era as Mu, but also once held the opportunity to reign over the entire universe. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he could still not tolerate a junior acting so presumptuously in front of him, especially when this particular junior had stolen Mu's final legacy from him. Amid the intense battle, Mo abruptly turned to look in a certain direction and fixed his gaze on one of Yang Kai's figures. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's main body. The main body was easy to identify. Not only was the aura of the main body the weakest among the other shadows, but the appearance of the main body was also the most disheveled and worse for wear due to the effects of performing the shadow technique. To break the shadow technique, it was necessary to either destroy the space-time river that acted as the foundation or the main body that acted as the core. At this moment, the space-time river was nowhere to be seen because it had been evenly divided between Yang Kai's 8 shadows. In that case, Mo only had one option left. Mo turned to face the storm of attacks coming from so many shadows and disregarded the injuries he sustained, even when the strongest shadow chopped off his arm. In the end, the heavy price he paid was worthwhile indeed. He successfully broke out of the encirclement created by the shadows and arrived in front of Yang Kai's main body. Black Ink's strength surged. Raising his remaining hand, Mo blasted his fist at Yang Kai. The punch was quite a distance away from Yang Kai, nevertheless, the force of the punch was enough to cause space to shatter, time to stop, and the universe to collapse. The blow containing Mo's full strength could not be dodged or avoided. Mo could almost see Yang Kai's main body being smashed into paste, and a hint of triumph flashed through the fury in his eyes, but unexpectedly, the imagined scene did not appear. Despite the incoming blow, Yang Kai's main body did not show the slightest trace of panic. On the contrary, he stepped forward and threw himself in the direction of the blow. Mo was stunned by the strange turn of events. Meanwhile, Yang Kai's main body suddenly unleashed a burst of power that far exceeded his own strength. The force directly penetrated the shackles of space and caused the stagnant time to flow again. Then, he punched out at the same time. Damn it! Mo abruptly realized that he had fallen into a trap. For a long time now, the core of the Nine Palaces formation had always been sustained by the strongest shadow. Nevertheless, the fact that Yang Kai's main body could exert such a powerful burst of strength indicated that the core of the Nine Palaces formation could be transferred to the main body. The method to break the shadow technique was to defeat the body which existed in the current spacetime. That was something both Mo and Yang Kai knew. Seeing as the former was bound to target the main body, how could the latter not take precautions? It could even be said that Yang Kai had been waiting for this very moment. A violent force swept out, pushing Mo's figure backwards. In the meantime, the 8 shadows attacked from all directions. Dao's strengths fluctuated wildly, and the barrage of attacks left Mo staggering from the impact. If that were all, Mo's situation would have been bad enough. However, each of the 8 shadows actually exerted strength that far exceeded their limits with every blow that they unleashed. The position as core of the formation was constantly being transferred around. To be precise, the position as core was instantly transferred to whichever shadow was attacking Mo at the time. Such a feat would have been impossible to achieve if it was any other configuration for the makeup of the battle formation, but Yang Kai could freely transfer the position as core between his main body and his shadows without any obstruction. This was the same strategy that Zhang Ruoxi had carried out previously. She and her 8 personal guard had both been the cores and not the cores at the same time. Such a perfect 9 palaces formation could be said to have no flaws whatsoever. More importantly, there was no need to fear the weak links being targeted. In fact, there was only one method to destroy this battle formation, which was to totally annihilate it by brute force. The biggest reason why Zhang Ruoxi had been defeated by Mo was that her personal guard could not withstand the intensity and ferocity of the battle. Transferring the core position to her personal guard was a huge burden on their bodies. Each time they became the core, they would also suffer heavy damage from the pressure, hence, there was a risk of their bodies collapsing after numerous transfers. The same was also true for Yang Kai. In fact, the burden was greatest on his main body. The main body had already been greatly weakened after performing the shadow technique. With the addition of the pressure from being the core of the formation, he couldn't help vigorously coughing up blood, his complexion turning as pale as a sheet. Be that as it may, he did not hesitate in the slightest. Taking full advantage of the opening created by the 8 shadows who were besieging Mo, Yang Kai stepped forward and approached Mo's arm that had been severed earlier. Although the arm was bleeding profusely, it was not a fully physical body part. Open. Yang Kai raised his arm and pointed at the arm. His divine sense surged turbulently. A moment later, a huge set of doors suddenly appeared in front of him. The door opened slightly to reveal a small gap, and then an indescribable pulling force seeped out from within and devoured the entire severed arm. This arm contained part of Mo's source. Previously, some 30% of Mo's source had been suppressed and sealed by Yang Kai with the help of the profound source gate. If Yang Kai could not suppress and seal this piece of Mo's source quickly, the opportunity to retrieve his severed arm and reabsorb the piece of his source he had lost would remain. Once Mo did so, he would return to full strength again. Now that this piece of his source had been sealed, Mo's aura dropped significantly. Although black ink strength surged at the spot where his arm had been severed and formed a new limb in the blink of an eye, the power that had been suppressed and sealed could no longer return. With the success of this attack, Yang Kai's confidence increased tremendously. This was the first crucial step towards victory. It was also the hardest and most dangerous step in the entire process. This step had paved the way for the rest of the path, making what came next easier. Retrieving the profound source gate, Yang Kai turned around and charged towards Mo. The furious battle resumed once more. The secret that the position as core of the 9 palaces formation could be freely transferred between the shadows had already been exposed, therefore, Yang Kai had no reason to hide his movements anymore. Dao's strengths fluctuated violently around him, and his offensive grew increasingly vicious. Mo was already no match for Yang Kai when the 9 palaces formation was formed, so now that he had lost a part of his source, his situation worsened even more. After a brief but intense battle, one of Yang Kai's shadows found an opening and chopped off one of Mo's arms again. Mo immediately attempted to retrieve his severed arm, but Yang Kai was already prepared for such an opportunity in advance. In the end, Mo was incapable of extricating himself from the battle due to the constant assault by the various shadows. Yang Kai's main body swiftly approached the severed arm, and for the second time, he summoned the profound source gate and devoured the source piece. After completing his task, Yang Kai coughed up another mouthful of blood. He raised his head and glanced at the battlefield. Perceiving the condition of his shadows, he knew that he could not persist for much longer. His main body was not the only one who was severely wounded by now, the rest of the shadows were also in a similar condition. However, only a small portion of these wounds were caused by Mo. Most of them had come from carrying the burden of being the Nine Palaces Formation Corps. Yang Kai's immense strength and heritage had allowed him to bear an unimaginable amount of pressure from being the Corps. That was only possible because it was him. If it were any other Ninth Order master instead, they would not have been able to withstand the pressure after being a Corps 3 times in such a situation, regardless of their strength. I have to end this as quickly as possible. Yang Kai muttered under his breath, then, he stepped forward and joined the battlefield. In the next moment, his strongest shadow took on the boundless pressure from being the Corps and unleashed a continuous storm of attacks without care whether his body could withstand the burden or not. Mo clearly faltered under the violent bombardment of the strongest shadow. While Mo was busy stewing in rage, the strongest shadow threw himself forward and disregarded Mo's counterattack to restrain Mo firmly. At such a close distance, he grinned at Mo and revealed a sinister row of fangs. Mo immediately understood Yang Kai's intentions. Roaring furiously, he desperately struggled to escape. However, the attacks that came blasting from all directions rained down on Mo and the shadow the next moment. Even the strongest shadow could not withstand this barrage of attacks, thus, he exploded and disintegrated completely. Likewise, Mo's body was battered from the attack. The left part of his body was gone, revealing the internal organs within his abdomen cavity. Mo staggered backwards weakly, a strange light flashing through his eyes for a moment. Before he could do anything though, another shadow charged towards him. Martial Peak, Chapter 6000, Many Thanks. The strongest shadow had already been shattered, and with that, the 9 Palaces formation had also been reduced to the 8 trigrams formation, which significantly reduced its might. At the same time, Mo's aura was not as strong as before. After 2 pieces of his source were sealed by Yang Kai, his aura had been notably weakened. As the remaining 7 shadows attacked Mo, Yang Kai's main body summoned the profound source gate for a 3rd time, suppressing and sealing another piece of Mo's shattered body. Mo's aura weakened once again. The 8 trigrams formation was now sufficient to deal with the current Mo. A series of fearsome attacks struck back the battle formation, destroying another of Yang Kai's shadows. In exchange, Mo once again suffered heavy injuries. The 8 trigrams formation had been reduced to the 7 stars formation. Previously, Yang Kai's shadows had emerged from the spacetime river one after another, joining the battle formation making it stronger, but the situation had reversed now. As more of these shadows perished, the might of the battle formation also began to weaken. The only benefit was that Mo also weakened. Each time a shadow perished, Mo's body would shatter and Yang Kai's main body would seize the opportunity to suppress and seal another piece of the former source. In the end, all of the shadows disappeared, leaving Yang Kai bleeding all over, staring right across at a miserable and weakened Mo. The current Mo had a large amount of his source suppressed and sealed, which significantly decreased his strength. He was no longer as mighty as before, and even the rich and dense black ink strength lingering around him was now extremely faint, almost invisible. The current Mo had lost more than 90% of his source. In other words, he only had 10% of his peak strength, which was far from prime condition. Right then, several figures flew over and formed a circle, surrounding the battlefield. They were the human race masters who had been watching from afar, as well as the giant spiritual gods Ada and Aer. Previously, it was impossible for them to intervene in the battle. Even the 2 giant spiritual gods were unable to approach, let alone the Ninth Order masters. However, as Mo's strength suffered with the destruction of Yang Kai's shadows again and again, the spectating masters finally had a chance to be useful. Mo had lost. It was simply impossible for him to deal with so many masters with his current strength. Just the 2 giant spiritual gods alone were enough to overpower him now. Nonetheless, Mo was laughing, his voice sounding extremely cheerful. Zhang Ruoxi stood before Yang Kai with the Heaven's Order sword in her hand, vigilantly staring at Mo. Although Mo was in a miserable state right now, no one knew what kind of methods this ancient being still had hidden up his sleeve. As such, they still had to take necessary precautions. Yang Kai. Mo's smile faded as it shouted at Yang Kai, "Let's settle this." Behind Zhang Ruoxi, Yang Kai calmed his roiling vitality and replied, "Good. Sir." Zhang Ruoxi shouted, "Allow me." She still had the strength to launch one last attack and was confident that she could take down Mo with it, so she naturally wouldn't let Yang Kai take the risk. "No. There's no need." Yang Kai stepped forward and walked past Zhang Ruoxi, staring at the nearby Mo. Even as victory was within his grasp, there was no trace of the pride or arrogance on Yang Kai's face as a victor should have, rather there was only a complicated expression. "None of you is to interfere," Yang Kai gently ordered. The gathered masters furrowed their brows ever so slightly. In the current situation, the best course of action was undoubtedly to attack together and take down Mo in an instant, ending this disaster that had lasted for millions of years once and for all. However, Yang Kai actually told them not to interfere. No one knew what Yang Kai was thinking or up to. However, out of their trust in Yang Kai, everyone still acquiesced to his demand. Be that as it may, they still maintained their encirclement, and focused their auras. If anything happened to Yang Kai, Mo would immediately be attacked from all directions. When dealing with Mo, there was no need to discuss honor or morals. Despite being surrounded on all sides, Mo's expression still remained calm. He simply stared at Yang Kai and shouted, "Come." As soon as he spoke, his figure rushed straight towards Yang Kai, leaving a streak of black light behind him. Simultaneously, Yang Kai also charged towards Mo. The moment the two figures collided, everyone's hearts jumped to their throats. However, the next thing that entered their sight left them relieved. Yang Kai's fist had smashed into Mo's chest, while Mo's fist had stopped right before Yang Kai's head. Pooh! Mo spurted a mouthful of black blood as his raised fist limply fell. Standing at arm's length from one another, when their eyes suddenly met, Mo smiled at Yang Kai. "Many thanks." Yang Kai nodded to him, and thought for a moment before adding, "I will let you see the world Mu wished for you to see." Despite the jet-black blood flowing from the corners of Mo's mouth, a free and relieved expression appeared on his face after hearing this. "Then, that's enough." Yang Kai didn't say anything more and summoned the profound source gate. As the gate cracked open, it swallowed Mo whole. Right afterwards, the door slowly closed itself, sealing the endless darkness behind it. Back then, it was Mu who had rescued Mo from behind this door, and after more than 1,000,000 years, Yang Kai had sent him back through it. This ancient being had lived his life. He did not dare say he didn't have any regrets, but at the very least, his life had certainly been quite an exciting one. Pooh! Yang Kai spurted a mouthful of blood before sitting down cross-legged, taking out a handful of pills from his space ring and stuffing them into his mouth. Everyone immediately rushed to him upon seeing this. Su Yan flew straight behind Yang Kai and sat down, allowing him to lean on her. After a while, Yang Kai's chaotic aura finally started to stabilize. As he opened his eyes, he saw many pairs of eyes gazing at him with worried looks. "I won't die," Yang Kai comforted everyone, allowing them to relax. Mi Jingluan finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, "Why did you thank Mo at the last moment?" Although no one heard Yang Kai's words of thanks, they could tell what he was saying by reading Yang Kai's lips. Yang Kai heaved a sigh, explaining, "From beginning to end, Mo never went all out." "What?" Ouyang Lai was shocked. "He didn't go all out? How is that possible?" The others also had a look of incredulity on their faces. To their surprise, their battle almost ended in mutual destruction even when Yang Kai had given it everything he had. Did that mean Mo would have obtained the final victory if he had not held back? Yang Kai continued, it's not that Mo didn't use his full strength, but rather that he didn't resort to any of his other tricks. Yang Kai had always been on guard against certain methods. The royal lords had their royal lord's secret technique, which could instantly corrupt Eighth Order masters. As the Black Ink clan's creator, how could Mo not have similar methods? What's more, such a method when used by Mo would surely be far more profound than what a royal lord could produce. Of course, Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus protecting his soul, and the world tree clone protecting his small universe, but even so, he could not say with absolute certainty that they would be able to defend against such a move. Sung once mentioned that a mere clone could not completely negate Mo's Black Ink strength, only the world tree itself would be capable of that. So, when Yang Kai fought with Mo, he had always been on guard. But from beginning to end, Mo had not used that mysterious method. Was it that Mo couldn't? Impossible. He just didn't want to. Even after Yang Kai summoned his 8 shadows, Mo still held a trump card that could have instantly turned the tables. Furthermore, he never needed to fight Yang Kai head-on, he could have just stalled for time, and the 8 shadows from the future spacetimes would slowly have dissipated. Not to mention, there was even a decent chance Mo could have broken away from the 9 Palaces formation's blockade and escaped. At the very least, it was clear Mo had no such intention. From beginning to end, he had fought with Yang Kai head-on. At first glance, it seemed like Mo wanted to kill Yang Kai, no matter the cost, but was that really the case? Therefore, although Mo had been fighting with all his strength against Yang Kai, he had not truly gone all out. Martial Peak, Chapter 6001, Price. This was the reason why Yang Kai thanked Mo in the end. I'm afraid this is the end he wanted. Mu had protected the human race and the universe for countless years, and even after her death, she had left behind many contingencies and hidden hands. Although the world was in ruins and the human race were like ants to Mo, it was still what Mu wanted to protect. Under the premise that the world had someone else strong enough to protect it, Mo was willing to go along with Mu's will. Of course, if Yang Kai didn't have the necessary strength, Mo wouldn't mind killing him. In that case, Mo would have still set aside a great territory for the human race to live and multiply after he dominated the entire universe. This way, the human race wouldn't be wiped out and he would have a reasonable explanation for Mu. At the end of the day, Mo was not inherently evil. In the late ancient era, he had even protected the human race and took it upon himself to help them gain their freedom. If it weren't for him and the 10 martial ancestors working together, the human race of that era would not have been able to defeat the early ancient era's great monsters. It was just that he was unable to control his gradually growing power and eventually lost his way, especially after Mu's demise. When she died, no one was able to restrain him anymore. Today's ending was something Mo himself probably sought from the start. Everyone sunk into silence after listening to Yang Kai's explanation of what truly happened, as what Mu would want others to know. Their current feelings were tough to describe. Mo's life might have been filled with misery, but he was still the one who had brought about the pain and suffering of the human race for millions of years. Had there been no Mo, the human race would have ruled the world unchallenged after defeating the early ancient era's great monsters. There would not have been a war that lasted for so many eons. The Black Ink disaster had caused unimaginable losses to the human race, with countless elites having sacrificed their lives to bring it to an end. As far as the human race was concerned, no matter how miserable Mo's life had been, it was an irrefutable fact that he was the human race's greatest enemy. As the adage goes, the winner is the king, and the loser is the villain. Gotcha. Suddenly, it sounded as if something had cracked. Everyone promptly turned to look at the source, and was immediately shocked. Big brother. Yang Shui called out, staring at Yang Kai's face in horror. Everyone also looked serious as a crack appeared on Yang Kai's face. It was not a normal wound, and neither was Yang Kai bleeding from it. After the first crack, another one appeared soon after, and then another, and another. They were not just on Yang Kai's face, but on his hands as well. The current Yang Kai looked like a piece of porcelain that was on the verge of shattering, and everyone could feel fearsome Dao strength seeping from these cracks. Yang Kai looked down at his hands and muttered to himself, "It came faster than I expected." He seemed to have anticipated his current situation. "What's happening?" Su Yan asked from behind him, her tender body uncontrollably trembling. After so many years of struggle, Mo was finally defeated and the black ink disaster was resolved. The future belonged to the human race, and it was foreseeable that the world would become a far better place. Yang Kai was the biggest contributor in the final battle, but at this moment, his entire body was shrouded in an inexplicable crisis. Everyone could not help but be nervous. What was even more disturbing was that no one had ever seen such injuries before. Yang Kai gently patted the back of Su Yan's hand, comforting her, "I won't die, but I don't have much time left." "What does that mean?" Xiao Xiao asked. How should I put it? Everyone around him was worried to death, but Yang Kai, the main person involved, remained completely calm and composed. The shadow technique was created by Mu with the space-time river as its foundation. I inherited her legacy and walked the same path as her, so naturally I can also use this secret technique. However, Mu's space-time river was incomplete, so her shadow technique was actually incomplete. She could only summon shadows from the past, and once those shadows dispersed, the memories of that period would also disappear. On the other hand, I have perfected this secret technique and can summon shadows from the future. Each shadow I summoned in the battle just now was from 1,000 years in my future. Now that the shadows have already been destroyed, I must pay the price. The more powerful a secret technique was, the harder it was to use it. The shadow technique was undoubtedly the most powerful secret technique that had ever appeared in this world, especially since Yang Kai had surpassed his predecessor and used it to defeat Mo. The price he had to pay would definitely not be small either. Once the shadows of the past are destroyed, the memories of the corresponding past will also disappear. So, what kind of price do you have to pay when your future shadow is destroyed? Mi Jingluan asked solemnly. I won't exist in those periods in the future. You won't exist? What do you mean? Although I can't explain it clearly, you can think of it as a literal statement. Mi Jingluan was silent for a moment, digesting this unbelievable news. You summoned 8 shadows, so does that mean 8,000 years of your future just disappeared? Indeed. What happens after 8,000 years? Yang Kai shook his head. I have no idea. After all, this was the first time he had used the shadow technique, so although he knew that he would cease to exist for the next 8,000 years, all traces of his existence would be erased by the space-time Tao strength of the universe, he couldn't say for certain what would happen after that. How could this be? Yang Shui's eyes turned red. It's not a big problem, I should be able to return after 8,000 years, Yang Kai comforted. Despite his assurance, everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. His back suddenly became lighter as Su Yan suddenly left. She returned soon after, but this time she brought Yu Ru Meng and the others with her. The eyes of all the women turned red as they tried to hold back their grief, preventing their tears from rolling down. Su Yan had already briefed everyone of the situation, so they knew the crisis Yang Kai was about to encounter. In the short time Su Yan was not there though, further cracks had appeared on Yang Kai and the leakage of Dao strengths had become more and more obvious. Yang Kai really didn't have much time left, and the backlash from the shadow technique was even stronger than he had imagined. Mi Jingluan shot a glance at the crowd, whereupon everyone apart from Yang Kai's close relatives retreated to the side. The women who had been brought here by Su Yan finally couldn't hold it in any further and burst into tears. In the end, it was Yu Ru Meng who acted like the big sister of the family and managed to compose herself first. Before she could say anything more though, the skin on Yang Kai's face began to peel off and disappear. Even though they were all 8th and 9th order masters now, there was nothing they could do. Everyone held back their grief as they helplessly watched Yang Kai's figure gradually vanish. At the very last moment, Yu Ru Meng shouted at Yang Kai, "You heartless bastard. Mark my words, if you don't come back after 8,000 years, I'll take my sisters and marry someone else. Yang Kai gave her a smile. This sounds so familiar. Yu Rumeng's will finally shattered, and she broke into tears. She tightly grabbed Yang Kai's hand, and begged, "You must come back. You must." Yang Kai swept his gaze over all of them one by one, as if he wanted to imprint their faces into the depths of his soul, before gently nodding and assuring, "Of course." Right then, scattered specks of light emerged before an enormous river spanning across the void appeared, enveloping Yang Kai. Soon after, an enormous wave came crashing down on him, swallowing him into the river. The river slowly disappeared, and so did Yang Kai along with it, leaving behind a group of women standing there in a daze, their endless sorrow flowing like a river. "Something's not right," Mi Jingluan, who was watching from afar, suddenly whispered before turning to Xiang Shan. "Do you feel it?" Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. "There's something wrong." The other Ninth Order masters more or less felt the same way. Although they couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong, Ninth Order masters were extremely perceptive. Their senses were so sharp that even just a slight disparity around them would arouse their suspicion. Everyone made their respective probes, but none of them were able to find anything amiss. Unable to find anything wrong, they had no choice but to put this matter aside, but they still maintained a certain degree of vigilance. The curtain of the final battle had already fallen. The Allied army had finished off the Black Ink clan army, while Mo had been completely sealed by Yang Kai. Although the greatest contributor had suffered severe backlash from his secret technique and had his existence wiped out by space and time for the next 8,000 years, when all was said and done, the victory needed to be publicized. When Mi Jingluan and the others returned and spread the news that Mo had been ended, the human race army of millions that had been waiting here all cheered and danced in joy. The war that had been going on for millions of years had finally come to an end. Now, all under the heavens belonged to the human race. After the battle, the casualties were counted and the aftermath was dealt with in an orderly manner. The small stone race army had already withdrawn and returned to the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The human race also began their withdrawal half a month later. The void corridor created by Zhang Ruoxi saved the human race a lot of time. Not everyone left, however. Headed by Su Yan and Yu Rumeng, Yang Kai's wives, his disciples, Yang Shui, Yang Shao, and several others all stayed behind. They remained in the place where Yang Kai had disappeared, quietly waiting for his return. The next 8,000 years would definitely be very dull and long, but so long as they could see Yang Kai the moment he returned, any amount of waiting would be worth it. A fleet of dilapidated warships entered the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The current Zhang Ruoxi could still somehow maintain the balance of yin and yang in her body, so the chaotic dead territory was now a safe place. Be that as it may, she couldn't maintain this state for much longer. In order to fight Mo and kill the royal lords, she had burned too much of her Heaven's Order bloodline. Once the human race army left the chaotic dead territory, she would break the harmony with the two. At that time, Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan would reappear, and Zhang Ruoxi would lose her previous strength. At the end of the day, if she didn't have her Heaven's Order bloodline that could maintain the harmony of yin and yang, she would just be a Ninth Order master. The fleet passed through the chaotic dead territory and soon returned to the 3,000 worlds. Many years ago, when the human race army first set off from the star boundary, they had some 30 million soldiers, but now, only slightly more than 10 million remained. Around 60% of the soldiers had died in this final war. Despite the terrible losses, compared to the solemn and miserable atmosphere they had when they first set out, everyone was high in spirits, and every warship was buzzing with cheers and laughter, despite the sad state of the army. On a certain purifying black ink warship that was so wrecked that it looked like it would fall apart at any moment, Mi Jingluan was standing at the bow with Xiang Shan beside him. The two calmly listened to the hustle and bustle on the other warships and exchanged a knowing glance. The human race has won, but the greatest contributor is unable to celebrate with us. It's quite regretful, Mi Jingluan couldn't help but lament. Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. Now that I think about it, had he not forced those peace treaties with the Black Ink clan, the human race wouldn't have been able to accumulate enough strength. That's right, Mi Jingluan nodded. By the looks of it, that treaty was an important turning point in the rise of the human race. What was that treaty called? What's it called again? The two Ninth Order masters glanced at each other before the smiles on their faces slowly faded away, gradually replaced by solemn looks. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6002, Response. While the millions of human race soldiers were making the trek back home, all the Ninth Order masters gathered aboard the only intact purifying black ink warship remaining. Compared to their peak, the number of Ninth Order masters had undoubtedly decreased significantly, with many of the recently advanced Ninth Order masters having perished in the battle. Only 20 or so had managed to survive. Apart from the Ninth Order masters, Fu Guang was also invited. Everyone took their seats. Most of them were still injured, their auras weak and unstable. The battle ended not that long ago, and even with the recuperative abilities of Ninth Order masters, it was impossible for them to fully recover in such a short time, especially since the human race was running low on supplies, especially recovery pills. One by one, the Ninth Order masters noticed the heavy air. They might not have an idea as to why Supreme Commander Mi had gathered all of them together, but they could tell that bad news was in store for them from his expression. After the last Ninth Order master took their seat, Mi Jingluan finally started addressing the crowd. I've summoned you here today to confirm something. He looked around, paused for a moment, then recounted his conversation with Xiang Shan. When the Ninth Order masters heard this, some were confused, some were lost in thought, and a few who realized the issue right away furrowed their brow. Yang Lai casually asked, "What's there to fret about with your conversation with Big Head Xiang?" He did not find anything wrong, it sounded just a normal chat to him. There's a big problem. Mi Jingluan stared at him with a solemn expression, causing Yang Lai to realize the gravity of the situation, despite not understanding what was the problem. Xiang Shan explained, the peace treaty we signed with the Black Ink clan back then was of paramount importance and could be said to be the turning point in the entire war. It is impossible for Brother Mi and I to forget the details of such an important matter. It would have been nothing if it was just one of us having a hard time recalling certain trivial points of the treaty, but the problem is that neither of us can remember them. When we were discussing the treaty, both of us were unable to immediately recall even some of the basic details of the agreement. That should be absolutely impossible. Yang Lai speculated, frowning, maybe you're too tired from the battle? Xiang Shan focused his gaze on him. Do you remember the first time you met Yang Kai? Of course I remember, Yang Lai replied readily. How could I forget such a thing? At that time, he slowly stopped talking. Obviously, he too had noticed the problem as his expression changed and a furrow appeared on his brow. Xiang Shan then turned to the other Ninth Order masters and asked, everyone, why don't you try recalling your encounters with Yang Kai, or some common knowledge about him? The Ninth Order masters complied. Soon, a bewildered look took over everyone's face. Observing everyone's expressions, Yang Lai immediately understood that they too had encountered the same situation as him. He could not help but mumble, how is this possible? When Xiang Shan asked him to, Yang Lai attempted to recall the first time he met Yang Kai, but he actually couldn't immediately remember it. It was as if his memory was blocked by an invisible barrier. It was right on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't enunciate it for some reason. After struggling for a few breaths, he finally remembered that the first time he met Yang Kai was outside Great Evolution Pass. At that time, Yang Lai was on a scouting mission with his disciples, and Yang Kai arrived to meet him under Xiang Shan's orders. At that time, Yang Kai was only a 7th Order master. Mi Jingluan's voice sounded in everyone's ears, it's not just you. After Brother Xiang and I discovered this problem, we ordered our men to ask the soldiers the same questions, and they too encountered the same situation. Regardless of whether they personally met with Yang Kai or simply heard stories about him, they were unable to immediately recall the details. What caused this phenomenon? Wu Qing asked in a low voice. He had just tried to recall things about Yang Kai, and it was indeed as Mi Jingluan had described. I don't know the exact reason, but I'm certain it has something to do with his shadow technique. Mi Jingluan continued, everyone should remember that Yang Kai said that the 8 shadows were summoned from the next 8,000 years. He also said that because those 8 shadows were destroyed, it meant that he would not exist for the next 8,000 years. Everyone nodded in acknowledgement as all of them were present when Mi Jingluan and Yang Kai were discussing this. Yang Kai said that it was the price he paid to use the shadow technique, but now it seems that Yang Kai himself had underestimated the severity of this price. He thought that the price he had to pay would be to disappear for the next 8,000 years, but in reality, some kind of invisible force is slowly erasing all traces of his existence from this world. So, anything related to him would slowly become blurred in the memories of others. Is such a thing really possible? Yang Lai found it hard to believe the most direct way one would think that removing the traces of a person's existence in this world meant was to kill that person, but the elimination that everyone encountered now was no longer as simple as just killing Yang Kai, even their memories of him were being lost. Mi Jingluan added, before Yang Kai used the shadow technique, even I hadn't expected for such a bizarre secret technique to exist. Yang Lai immediately fell silent. The mysteries of the shadow technique were beyond their comprehension, so the price for using it was also unfathomable. As such, no matter how unbelievable Mi Jingluan's speculations were, there was indeed a possibility they were true. This is just the beginning. What I'm worried about is we might even forget everything about Yang Kai with time. All of the Ninth Order masters were shocked. As the greatest hero who led the human race to victory and defeated Mo, Yang Kai should be remembered for all generations, but if the human race were to completely forget about him, that would truly be a tragic misfortune. What will happen if we completely forget about Yang Kai? Mi Jingluan asked. No one could answer. He didn't ask any more, and instead postulated, before disappearing, Yang Kai said that he would return after 8,000 years, but even he did not sound certain of that. So, he might be able to return, or he might completely disappear. Right now, the traces of his existence are slowly being erased, which is akin to him disappearing. If one day everyone completely forgets about him, perhaps he might never appear again. Fu Guang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. Supreme Commander Mi, do you mean to say that if many people in this world remember him and his fame remains widespread, perhaps it can help him return? Mi Jingluan shook his head, I'm not sure, but it is possible. Then, it's worth a shot. Fu Guang nodded. However, the most important thing right now is to investigate the speed at which his traces are being erased. Only by confirming this matter can we make appropriate arrangements. Agreed. Agreed. We'll do as Supreme Commander Mi says. After many days of investigation by Ninth Order masters and questioning thousands of randomly selected soldiers, everyone reached an unfortunate conclusion. The speed at which Yang Kai's traces were being erased was increasing, more and more things related to Yang Kai were being forgotten. At this rate, everything related to Yang Kai would be completely gone in short order. By then, no one in this world would remember that there was once a hero who had saved the entire human race. Mi Jingluan couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He immediately sent people back to the original location of the primordial heaven's source Grand Restriction to inform Su Yan and the others who were staying there. Although Su Yan and the others would most likely notice this on their own, it was always better to be prepared. An advance team had already been sent back to relay the news of their victory to the human race forces in the rear, so a joyful mood was already spreading. When the army returned, they were naturally received with warmth and celebration. The human race army had suffered heavy casualties in this battle, losing more than 60% of its soldiers. Be that as it may, it was all worth it as in the future, the world would no longer face the threat of black ink strength. But contrary to the expectations of everyone who had remained behind, the Crusade force showed no signs of celebrating after their return. Instead, they quickly dispersed as if there was a new mission waiting for them. Soon, great statues were erected in the star boundary, myriad monsters' world, and everywhere else the human race lived, whether it was a village, a town, or a city. The statue depicted a brave and heroic man wielding a long spear that seemed to have a dragon coiling around it. This man seemed to be staring down an invisible enemy, confronting them in battle. At the base of the statue was Yang Kai's name. Meanwhile, Mi Jingluan entered High Heaven Palace, and with the cooperation of Hua Qingxi and Xia Ningchang, gathered all the people who had close relationships with Yang Kai. Afterwards, under Mi Jingluan's supervision, they jointly wrote a biography. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's biography, and it included all the big and small matters that had happened in his life. There were no excessively embellished accounts in it, just the simple and factual descriptions. Nonetheless, anyone who read this biography would understand how magnificent Yang Kai's life was. Everyone would come to know that in the darkest era of the human race, it was he who tore through the darkness and brought a bright ray of hope to them. They would also come to know that Yang Kai had ultimately paid a huge price to finally defeat the ancient being named Mo and end the war between the two races that had lasted for millions of years. Most importantly, they would know that the world could not forget him, otherwise, he would never be able to return. After this biography was written, countless copies of it were made by High Heaven Palace disciples and distributed to all the places where the human race lived, especially the places where Yang Kai's statue was erected. The Ninth Order Masters even personally placed these jade slips containing Yang Kai's biography into the statues. This way, as long as someone examined the statue, they would be able to immediately perceive the contents of the jade slip and understand Yang Kai's life experiences. Many of the human race's upper echelons were trying their best to prevent the human race from forgetting their greatest hero, Yang Kai. On top of that, the Ninth Order Master once again convened a meeting after the army had returned. Everyone felt that the world was vast and time was difficult to measure, so they decided that the year the Crusade force returned to the star boundary would be designated as the first year of the Void Era. Void was a title, the title of one of the greatest heroes that was slowly being forgotten. As time passed away, new generations of humans were born, matured, and aged. Everyone had already forgotten about Yang Kai, even the Ninth Order Masters who had fought alongside him, but the statues that had been erected remained standing tall. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6003, 8,000 Years. Void Era, Year 7, 999. The star boundary, where High Heaven Cave Heaven, which was ranked first among the 36 cave heavens, was located, had its ban on entry lifted. Immediately, countless cultivators who were waiting outside the star boundary swarmed in and spread out. The cultivators were entering the star boundary from every possible direction, and were in huge numbers. Although there were all sorts of people among the crowd, no one dared to act rashly on the star boundary, no matter what their temperament was. They had become kind and simple after setting foot onto this universe world. This wasn't just because the star boundary was the domain of the strongest cave heaven, but also because Tao temples of all the other cave heavens and paradises were located here. It could be said that one could find Seventh Order Masters casually walking the streets in the star boundary, even Eighth Order Masters were as common as dogs. Only the sighting of the legendary Ninth Order Masters, who generally remained hidden, would cause some minor sensation. If anyone acted irreverently here, not to mention the sun tomorrow, he or she might not even see the moon tonight. The main reason why the star boundary was so lively was because the Void Festival that was celebrated once every millennia would be held here. Many of the younger generation didn't know the origins of this festival, only that a ceremony was held at the turn of every millennium of the Void Era, and it had been celebrated 7 times already. And if the one that was about to be held was also counted, this would be the 8th. Rumor had it that 8,000 years ago, the living environment of the human race was extremely harsh. At that time, there was a species called the Black Ink Clan that nearly wiped out the human race and conquered the known universe. Back then, the human race was truly on the verge of extinction. However, thanks to its many great heroes and brave soldiers, the human race slowly regained their footing. In the end, the entire human race launched a grand crusade and completely eradicated the Black Ink Clan. From then on, the human race became the true rulers of this world. As for the Void Festival, it was held to commemorate all the humans who gave their lives in the war against the Black Ink Clan. It could be considered the biggest event in the entire human race. The festival would be celebrated for an entire year, during which anyone could freely enter the star boundary. It had to be known that as the territory of the strongest cave heaven, it was normally forbidden for outsiders to enter. This wasn't because high heaven cave heaven was tyrannical, but because they had no other choice. Since the end of the Great War 8,000 years ago, although the human race had managed to quell the black ink disaster that had lasted for millions of years, they had paid an extremely heavy price. Countless masters had died in battle, while the entire 3,000 worlds had been devastated by the Black Ink clan. The only universe worlds suitable for the survival of the human race were the ones in High Heaven territory and the Myriad Monsters territory. The number of habitable universe worlds had been significantly reduced, and as such, the living environment had also suffered. Cultivation resources were also in short supply. As such, the birth of too many cultivators would inevitably lead to chaos. So, the current cultivators could no longer be as unrestrained as they were before the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds. Everything had to be done in a planned manner. 8,000 years ago, the Ninth Order Masters had jointly held a discussion and reached a consensus, which was that anyone with the aptitude to cultivate would have to report to the cave heavens and paradises, and their cultivation matters would be arranged by one of these top forces. This decision was strictly enforced with the joint efforts of all the human race forces. So, all cultivators of the human race, regardless of their background or cultivation, were duly noted and recorded. This decision made the already special star boundary even more exclusive. The star boundary had a world tree clone, and was the first open heaven realm cradle. The second open heaven realm cradle was the Myriad Monsters world. In the years when the human race was fighting the Black Ink clan, the two open heaven realm cradles, the star boundary and Myriad Monsters world, had given birth to many high-rank open heaven realm masters. It could be said that these two open heaven realm cradles played a huge role in the human race's victory in the final battle. However, after the war ended, because of the limit in habitable areas, it was difficult for the human race to withstand the birth of so many new generation cultivators, which put the star boundary and Myriad Monster world in an extremely awkward position. After returning from the crusade and realizing this problem, the human race's higher-ups made another decision, which was to withdraw everyone from the star boundary and Myriad Monster world, especially the large number of ordinary people. These ordinary people could not cultivate, but given their huge numbers, they could give birth to many children, some of which would have the aptitude for cultivation. If restrictions weren't put in place, it wouldn't be long before new generations of cultivators were born, which would inevitably lead to unnecessary unrest. Even the people who remained in the star boundary Myriad Monsters world were forbidden from having children. If they wanted to have children, they would have to leave these two open heaven realm cradles. Of course, the human race's upper echelons also knew that cutting off all avenues forward was not sustainable, so they left behind a glimmer of hope. That hope lay in the Void Festival that was held every 1,000 years. During this one-year-long grand festival, everyone was allowed to freely enter and exit the star boundary. If one could join one of the Tao temples of the various cave heavens and paradises, they would naturally be qualified to remain in the star boundary to cultivate. It was difficult to calculate how many people had entered the star boundary every time the grand festival started, but the number who could truly worship the various Tao temples was not that high. This led to a strange phenomenon, which was that many pregnant women or young married couples would enter the star boundary during the festival. Those pregnant women would then find a place with excellent world energy and live with their families, nourishing their fetus in peace, so that their unborn babies could enjoy the feedback from the world tree clone. As for those young couples, they were only 2 when they arrived, but when they left, their wives' stomachs would most likely be bulging. Jade Mountain Square, an extremely common market in the star boundary. Because of the decisions made in the past, a large number of humans were relocated away from the star boundary, leaving it quite sparsely populated. Owing to which, places like Jade Mountain Square were usually deserted. In other words, this place was only bustling with humans because the grand festival was approaching and countless people had poured into the star boundary. A young couple was strolling around the market, holding hands. The man was suave and handsome, whereas the woman was as beautiful as a flower, they were a perfect match. The woman's belly happened to be slightly bulging, she was obviously pregnant. At this moment, the husband and wife arrived before a tall statue and looked up. The wife kept reaching out to her husband's hand, who helplessly handed her the food in his hands and grumbled, "I told you not to eat so many sweets, why don't you listen?" His wife didn't even spare him a glance and bit down on the candied fruit in her hand, mumbling, "Who says I am the one who wants to eat it? Clearly it's the child in my stomach who wants to eat." The husband couldn't help but roll his eyes. Every time she brought up the child in her womb, he couldn't do anything about it. "Dear, do you think this Yang Kai really exists?" The wife quickly finished a stick of candied fruit and took another stick from her husband's hand. "Why are his statues everywhere?" Wherever they went, wherever a human settlement was present, they always found such statues. Rumor had it that these statues had been standing for nearly 8,000 years and had not been eroded by the passage of time at all. Obviously, they were protected by the power of an expert. "How would I know?" the husband brusquely replied. His wife muttered to herself, "His biographies are everywhere, and it seems that everyone has read it intensively." Moreover, according to his biography, he used some kind of profound spacetime secret technique in order to defeat the ancient enemy, which caused all traces of him to be erased from people's minds, and that he would never be able to return if everyone truly forgot about him. Counting the time, it just so happens that when this festival starts, it will be the time for him to return. "Dear, why don't we go take a look?" The husband's face darkened. "Why are you looking for him? He's a hero. We humans can have today thanks to his efforts and sacrifices. It's only right that we pay respect to him. His biography has been passed down for 8,000 years, who knows if it's true or not. I think he must be a wise and mighty man." Crunch, crunch, why are you eating my candied fruit? So sour. It's obviously very sweet. According to his biography, he had many wives. "Humph, you finally exposed your wild ambitions. My dear child, your father doesn't want us anymore, our lives are really miserable." "No, that's not what I said, don't be ridiculous." Everywhere where the humans were gathered, similar conversations were happening between the young couples. Under the vigorous promotion and maintenance of various major sects, the biography compiled by Mi Jing Luan had been widely circulated these past 8,000 years. It could be said that any human older than 10 had read Yang Kai's biography at least once. As far as the later generation was concerned, this biography was just a storybook, allowing them to understand the magnificent life of a man named Yang Kai. As for whether the records in this biography were true or fabricated, no one could confirm. This was something even the ancient cultivators of the cave heavens and paradises were unable to determine, because in their memories, many of the things recorded in the biography had indeed happened, but none of them had the slightest impression of the man named Yang Kai being there. If this was really the backlash of the so-called shadow secret technique, it would be too terrifying. Meanwhile, the Ninth Order Masters had gathered at High Heaven Palace. Compared to the crusade back then, the number of Ninth Order Masters had undoubtedly increased. There were more than 100 Ninth Order Masters. After all those rising stars, who possessed the aptitude to advance to the Ninth Order open heaven realm, had gradually advanced over the last 8,000 years. In the main hall, everyone was talking in small groups. Unless there was something important, the Ninth Order Masters seldom gathered together. The Ninth Order Masters also rarely appeared in public. Only a grand event like the Void Festival could gather all the Ninth Order Masters together. With over 100 Ninth Order Masters, the human race's foundation had reached a peak that it had not seen in over 10,000 years. Whether it was the newly advanced Ninth Order Masters, or the old veterans, all of them had participated in the war against the Black Ink clan. Now that they had gathered together, it was only natural for them to reminisce about the glorious past and as they watched the current generation compete against each other. Yang Lai was especially boisterous as he moved through the crowd. When he started talking about the great battles he had fought in the past, he unceasingly beamed with joy. When he got excited, he even pulled his disciple, Gong Lian over. In the past, when this old master was only an 8th order open heaven realm master, when I fought against a pseudo-royal lord alone, that pseudo-royal lord wet his pants in terror. This brat saw it with his own eyes. Hey, tell them. Martial Peak, Chapter 6004, Chanting. Gong Lian, who was still called Brat by Ouyang Lai, had already reached the 9th order. Basically, his cultivation was the same as Ouyang Lai's, but as there was still a master and disciple relationship between them. Even if he was a 9th order master, he could not go against Ouyang Lai. So, he could not help but nod his confirmation after hearing this. Honored master is telling the truth. Ouyang Lai's laughter became even more carefree. A few of the newly advanced 9th order masters also started laughing, all of them knowing how Ouyang Lai loved to brag and deciding to just go along with it. All of them had witnessed or experienced the might of a pseudo-royal lord firsthand, and it was definitely not something an 8th order master could contend with, unless they formed a battle formation. Be that as it may, back when there weren't many 8th order masters, Ouyang Lai had indeed fought a pseudo-royal lord alone, and it was him who was beaten to the point that he had wet his pants. Even so, fighting a pseudo-royal lord alone was still an incredible feat in itself. At that moment, the noisy hall suddenly fell silent, everyone stopped blowing their own trumpet and raised their eyes, looking directly above. In that direction was a calm and composed, half-white-haired 9th order master with a smile on his lips. He swept his gaze over everyone before addressing them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been 1,000 years since we last met, but it seems everyone's noble bearing is still the same. There are also a few new faces, very good. Everyone greeted with a bow. Greetings, Supreme Commander Mi. The person who had arrived was none other than Mi Jingluan. Although the human race's crusade force and the various armies had been disbanded, Mi Jingluan's title of Supreme Commander had remained. In terms of cultivation, Mi Jingluan might not be the strongest 9th order master, but in every battle against the Black Ink clan, he had played a far greater role than any other 9th order master. There was no battle in which he had not racked his brain hard to map out a strategy for victory, and it was he who had ultimately coordinated and dispatched the various troops. He was a cultivator of the same era as Ouyang Lai, Xiang Shan, and Wei Junyang, but if they were to stand together, Mi Jingluan would definitely look older because he had been under even greater stress and for a longer duration during the thousands of years of war. Above the main hall, Mi Jingluan returned the greeting before continuing. It's the day of the Void Festival. Counting the time, this is already the 8th celebration, and I'm sure everyone knows what this means. Hearing this, everyone's expressions became solemn. For a long time, there have been gaps in our memories. There appears to be traces of a person's existence in many key memories, but whether it's us or others, none of us can remember this person. I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I oversaw the compilation of this person's biography, but now that I think about it, it was definitely the best decision I've ever made in my life. All the signs indicate that this person should have really existed, and that all the accounts in this person's biography should indeed be true. This person is the greatest contributor to the human race's victory over the Black Ink clan. Unlike the cultivators with low cultivation, although the 9th order masters present here had some gaps in their memories, these missing memories could be perfectly filled in by Yang Kai's biography. Therefore, they could conclude that Yang Kai really did exist and the records in his biography were not fabricated. The reason they had forgotten about Yang Kai was because of the mysteries of the shadow secret technique. A hero cannot be allowed to be forgotten, otherwise, the current human race does not deserve to live. 8,000 years have already passed, and it is time for him to return. The void ceremony has been conducted precisely for this moment. Everyone, the arrangements we had laid back then should be used. It's time to witness the truth. The world only knew that the Void Festival ceremony was a grand event for the entire human race, but didn't know that it was a hidden hand Mi Jingluan and the other 9th order masters had arranged long ago. When they had set up this contingency back then, perhaps they had still not completely forgotten about Yang Kai, but now, they really could not remember anything about him. It didn't matter if they didn't remember though, as long as the plan worked. Please instruct us, Supreme Commander Mi. The Ninth Order masters cupped their fists. Mi Jingluan lightly smiled. Then let us see if all of this is just an unrealistic conjecture on our part or if we really have forgotten something. One after another, the Ninth Order masters received their orders and flew out of the hall, quickly disappearing, leaving only one Ninth Order master behind. This was a titled Great Emperor recognized by the Star Boundary and the only surviving Great Emperor who had managed to break through to the Ninth Order. There had been other Ninth Order Great Emperors from the Star Boundary, but they had all fallen during the Crusade. The hall sunk into complete silence as Mi Jingluan and the Great Emperor patiently waited. 10 days later, Mi Jingluan finally opened his eyes and glanced at the Ninth Order Great Emperor. It's about time. The Ninth Order Great Emperor slightly nodded before slowly closing his eyes and spreading his divine sense. The next instant, he had become one with the entire Star Boundary. Right then, in every settlement across the universe world, Yang Kai's statues, which had stood tall for 8,000 years, suddenly started glowing, attracting the attention of countless people. Soon after, a voice started to reverberate from the statue, chanting something. What the voice was reciting was the contents of Yang Kai's biography. The voice seemed to contain some kind of mysterious power, causing everyone who heard it to involuntarily stop in their tracks and quietly listen. As the chanting continued, an enormous picture scroll seemed to have filled everyone's vision. The picture scroll was impressively portraying the life of a cultivator named Yang Kai and how he gradually grew to become the strongest, eventually leading the human race to defeat their enemies. Not just in the Star Boundary, even in Myriad Monsters territory, on every universe world where the humans lived, the setup in the statues was activated by the Ninth Order Masters. At this moment, that chanting was simultaneously ringing in the ears of trillions of humans. Once, twice, 3 times. Gradually, people began to read along the voice coming from the statue. Almost everyone had read Yang Kai's biography, and many scholars had even memorized it by heart. Only, the biography which in the past was only read to pass time was given heavy importance today. Trillions of humans were chanting the Void Great Emperor's real name. At the same time, in the distant void, on the battlefield where the final battle between Yang Kai and Mo was fought, a few people were gathered together inside a floating palace. There weren't many people, only a dozen or so, but apart from a middle-aged couple, the lowest cultivation of the others was the Eighth Order, and there were actually quite a number of Ninth Order masters present. Everyone gathered here was Yang Kai's close relative. His parents, his wives, his disciples, Yang Shao, Yang Shui. These people had been waiting here for 8,000 years. Xia Ning Chang had originally stayed behind to guard High Heaven Palace because, despite her high cultivation, she had very little experience in fighting. Moreover, she was an alchemy great-grandmaster and was more useful stationed in the rear. However, for the final crusade, even she was roped in. After their triumphant return, once Xia Ning Chang had helped compile Yang Kai's biography with Mi Jingluan, she immediately returned here. Naturally, Mi Jingluan immediately set out to fetch all those close to Yang Kai, bringing Yang Yingfeng and Dong Su Zhu here to meet up with Su Yan and the others to wait for Yang Kai's return. Their wait had now lasted for 8,000 years. Martial Peak, Chapter 6005, Supreme Master. The Shadow Technique's backlash struck without any notice, and was impossible to guard against. At first, Yang Kai's relatives could still remember him, but gradually, all their memories of him began to fade away, and eventually disappeared. One after another, gaps began to appear in everyone's memories. For a period of time, everyone had even forgotten why they had gathered here until they remembered that they were waiting for a very important person. As for who that person was, none of them had any impression of him. The biography that Xia Ning Chang brought back with her had a great effect. The things recorded in the biography and the remaining memories in their minds perfectly complemented each other. This helped them know that a person named Yang Kai had appeared in their lives, and that person held quite a huge place in their hearts. Not far from their location was a void corridor leading straight to chaotic dead territory. At this moment, a figure walked out from the void corridor. It was none other than Zhang Ruoxi. Roashi's cultivation was currently at the peak of the ninth order, though the wings on her back had disappeared due to separating from the power of yin and yang. Her Heaven's Order bloodline had been almost completely burned out in the final battle, so she was no longer able to maintain the delicate balance between the two opposing powers. So, she had no choice but to return to chaotic dead territory and strip away the power of yin and yang. Although the loss of her Heaven's Order bloodline was a significant detriment to her, it didn't have much of an impact on her personal strength. It was just that it would be difficult for her to regain the phenomenal power she had displayed that time in the future. Walking out of the void corridor, and identifying her bearing, Roashi quickly arrived at Su Yen and the others' location. Noticing her appearance, everyone looked at her. "It's starting," Roashi stated softly. Everyone nodded as a solemn look took over their faces. On the platform in front of the palace, everyone sat down cross-legged and calmly started reciting Yang Kai's name. At first, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Over the past 8,000 years, everyone had done similar things countless times just to remind themselves not to forget that name. However, as time went by, a different feeling slowly began to rise in their hearts. Everyone felt suffocated, as if there was a mountain pressing down on them, one that was becoming heavier and heavier. As this suffocating feeling grew stronger and stronger, the forgotten emotions also began to awaken, and along with them, a painful longing gripped their hearts. No one knew who they were missing, and none of them had a clear picture of them in their heart, but they had this feeling that someone who had left a deep mark in their lives had been forgotten, and that person's name was Yang Kai. In a vivid and colorful mysterious void filled with chaos and distortions, a tall and stalwart man with a sword in his hands let out an angry roar before swinging it down. This sword strike almost cut the space-time river in two, revealing Yang Kai's flickering figure behind it. By the time the water rolled back after the strike, Yang Kai had already arrived before the sword-wielding man. He then raised his hand and pointed a finger towards the opponent, sending a wave of water towards the stalwart figure. The stalwart man's expression instantly changed. Having fought Yang Kai for thousands of years, he naturally understood the might of this seemingly unremarkable wave. This wave contained the might of 10,000 grand Daos, so even he didn't dare to let himself get swallowed by it. The stalwart man raised his sword and slashed out, shattering the incoming wave and splashing droplets of water flying in all directions. At the same time, the stalwart man quickly withdrew as if he was avoiding snakes and scorpions. Yang Kai didn't chase after him and simply stood in place. Yang Kai sighed in his heart. When he had used the Shadow Secret technique to defeat Mo and was corroded by the space-time Dao strength, he basically thought that he would fall into a deep slumber or something similar, but how could he have known he would appear in this mysterious place in the blink of an eye? After arriving here, Yang Kai began exploring, and to his astonishment, he discovered he was not alone here. There were actually many other masters. These masters were no weaker than him, with some even being stronger. This revelation left him in total shock, because in the entire world, whether it was his cultivation or his comprehension of his grand Daos, no one could hold a candle to him. Even Mo, who had 30% of his source sealed, had been killed by him, so who in this universe could be his opponent? But here, there were many masters here who could exchange blows evenly with Yang Kai. What left him even more speechless was that the people here were all extremely belligerent. It did not matter whether there were any grievances between them or not. Once two parties met, a fight broke out at least 90% of the time. Battles seemed to become the prime motivation for the survival of the living beings here. In the beginning, Yang Kai had suffered quite a bit. But his situation gradually improved over time as his injuries healed and his comprehension of the 10,000 grand Daos deepened. He also made a friend. That man's name was Chongjiu, and he was also very powerful. When Yang Kai was being hunted down after first arriving, the man acted out of righteousness and helped him out. Through his conversation with Chongjiu, Yang Kai finally understood that this was a place of exile for all masters who had touched upon the taboo. In other words, everyone who was here had touched upon the secrets of the heavens at one time or another. Yang Kai had summoned shadows from the future, which was a taboo. Although he didn't know what Chongjiao had done, he was certain he had done something similar. As such, this place was simply dubbed the Taboo Realm. What's more, anyone who entered this place would be quickly forgotten by the outside world. All memories related to those who entered this place would be erased in short order. In the 3,000 worlds, there were definitely very few living beings who could compare to Yang Kai. Yang Kai then recalled the universe furnace and its process of creating new universe worlds, and immediately understood that the masters here all came from different worlds or even universes, ones far beyond the boundaries of the 3,000 worlds. Each and every one of them had reached the pinnacle of their strength in their own realm and had even touched upon that which should not be touched. Yang Kai had once asked Chongjiao how to escape this place, and the latter hid nothing. He knew more things than Yang Kai as he had arrived a bit earlier than him. According to him, it wasn't impossible to escape from this place. In fact, there were two methods to escape from here. However, whether these two methods really worked or not was still open to debate, because there had never been a precedent of anyone leaving this place. The first method was to continue fighting and kill the masters from other worlds. Perhaps if they killed enough of them, they might be able to leave. No one knew who proposed this idea, but it sounded a bit unreliable because there was no basis for it. The second method was much more plausible, and it was to have the people of your universe still remember you and wish for your return. A person will die twice in their lifetime. The first time is when their life ends, and the second time is when the last person who remembers forgets them. As far as we are concerned, we may still be alive here, but the world we used to live in no longer remembers us, so we are dead to that world. If we want to rise from the dead, enough people must remember you for you to break through the restrictions here. These were the exact words of Chongjiao, and Yang Kai remembered them very clearly. At that time, Chongjiao had been drinking the spirit wine he had taken out from his small universe while saying these words. Although this second method was much more reliable than the first, it was still impractical, because once someone entered this place, his or her respective universe would be affected by the restrictions, wiping every single memory related to him or her in a very short time. Once the memories were wiped out, everything was lost. Even if there were some written records left behind, they would just become dust in history over time. Saying so, Chongjiao patted Yang Kai's shoulder. "Little brother, just stay here. Although there's no way out of here, it's still quite lively." It was indeed quite lively. Supreme masters of many worlds were gathered here, fighting non-stop every day. This kind of thing would be rarely seen in the outside world, but here it was a common occurrence. At that time, Yang Kai just responded to Chongjiao in one sentence: "I will be able to get out. My world will never forget me." Chongjiao looked at him like he was looking at an idiot and threw a sentence: "I'll be waiting for that day." Calculating the time, that day should be arriving soon. While Yang Kai was lost in a daze, the tall and stalwart man had returned at some point, and sent a fearsome sword wave at him, forcing him to dodge. From nearby, Chongjiao's playful laughter rang out. "Yang Kai, don't die. If you die, I won't be able to watch the good show." He had already arrived a few days ago as promised, wanting to see if Yang Kai could really leave this place. Although he felt that Yang Kai didn't have much hope, since he made a deal, he naturally had to abide by it. Unexpectedly, someone came to seek revenge on Yang Kai at this point. Although it was called seeking revenge, the truth was that there was no great enmity between them. The sword-wielding man had fought with Yang Kai at least 100 times over the past few thousand years, and neither of them had been able to do anything to the other. But this time, he actually brought a companion, wanting to overwhelm Yang Kai with numbers. But unbeknownst to them, Chongjiao happened to be together with Yang Kai. A battle had broken out immediately afterwards. Yang Kai was up against the sword-wielding stalwart man while Chongjiao dealt with his companion. At this moment, a towering tree had emerged behind Chongjiao. It was gently swaying, glittering and shining as if it was cast from gold. One after another, its leaves whizzed through the void, cutting space apart. Its every move carried endless power. Chongjiao's opponent was forced to retreat every time he tried to press forward. After fighting for a while, the master couldn't help size up Chongjiao before asking, the Dao tree lineage. Chongjiao raised his brow, you've seen it? The master continued, the Dao tree lineage is famous throughout the heavens, and I had the honor of experiencing it firsthand once before. Saying so, he put away his weapon, I won't fight anymore. Chongjiao smiled slightly, I was thinking the same. Battles were common occurrences in the taboo realm, but there were many cases where a simple smile and greeting could wipe away all enmity. After all, everyone's strength was about the same, so unless there was some kind of irreconcilable grudge between them, no one was willing to really fight to the death. For example, someone like the sword-wielding stalwart man who repeatedly sought trouble with Yang Kai was actually quite rare. He kept attacking Yang Kai mainly because Yang Kai had only been here for a short time, and the sword-wielding man believed that he was an easy target. Owing to repeated battles, Yang Kai's strength had grown significantly over the past 8,000 years. This wasn't surprising though, as Yang Kai did not get the time to consolidate his foundation and perfect it after swallowing and refining Mu's spacetime river before he was forced to fight Mo to the death. It wasn't until he had entered this place and fought battle after battle that Yang Kai finally digested the benefits he had obtained from Mu's final gift. Furthermore, his small universe's foundation was constantly increasing. If he was allowed to go 8,000 years back in time to deal with Mo, he would definitely not end up as miserable as before. Martial Peak, Chapter 6006, Breakthrough. The masters in the taboo realm came from different universes, so the cultivation systems were naturally different as well. For example, the world where Chongjiao came from did not cultivate the open heaven realm method. The denizens of his world had their own way of dividing the realms. Be that as it may, the fundamental principles of cultivation were more or less the same. At Yang Kai's and the others' realm, the prime focus of cultivation was the comprehension and application of the Grand Taos. The shining golden tree behind Chongjiao was his Tao, the spacetime river was Yang Kai's Tao, and the sword-wielding stalwart man fighting Yang Kai had a Tao of his own. The sword in his hand was precisely his Tao. Yang Kai had never seen a master with such a pure Tao. Yang Kai had seen and fought many masters over the past 8,000 years, but none could compare to the sword-wielding stalwart man in terms of pure offense and aggression. In any battle, the stalwart man was constantly on the attack, essentially disregarding defense entirely. At most, he would dodge a little when necessary. Fighting such a person was incredibly frustrating, and it was extremely difficult to reach a conclusion, as the only way to settle things with any sense of finality was for someone to die. Jianba, there is no enmity between us, why must you insist on fighting? After exchanging blows for a while longer, Yang Kai shouted as the waves under him swirled. Jingba, who was standing right across from him, hideously grinned, why bring up enmity in this damned place? Since I'm here, one of us will die today, the question is whether it will be you or I. Yang Kai slowly shook his head. He was completely unable to reason with him. If the shadow secret technique could be used, Yang Kai was confident he could defeat Jianba, but he had already summoned shadows from 8,000 years of his future when he was fighting with Mo, which ultimately caused him to be trapped here. He was basically unable to use the shadow secret technique. Shadows of the same spacetime could only be summoned once. Helpless, Yang Kai could only use the power of his spacetime river to fight ceaselessly with Jianba. However, Yang Kai was feeling uneasy for some unknown reason today. He thought that he was feeling unnerved because the 8,000-year deadline was approaching, but later he realized that wasn't the case. He could not afford to get distracted when fighting someone as powerful as Jianba, so how could he have the spare energy to consider the 8,000-year deadline? What caused him to feel uneasy must be something external. As such, he was slowly losing ground against Jianba. Chongjiao, who was watching the battle from afar, noticed this unusual situation and couldn't help but furrow his brow. Nonetheless, he too had no idea what was going on with Yang Kai. Furthermore, he was being marked by Jiangba's companion. He could not lend Yang Kai a hand, and could only wait and watch. Fearsome Dao strength shockwaves spread into the surroundings as the two men clashed endlessly until at one point, Yang Kai suddenly heard a shout ring in his ear. Yang Kai instantly fell into a trance, but before he could hear it clearly, Jianba had already disappeared. Immediately, a sense of crisis gripped his entire body. Yang Kai knew that he was in real trouble. His figure quickly distorted and faded away, but the next moment, Jiangba arrived before him and slashed down at his fading figure. A splash of blood spattered into the void while Yang Kai's figure appeared in another direction, promptly covering his abdomen. Apparently, Jiangba's sword had cut him, leaving a gaping wound. The indistinct shout once again rang in his ear. Yang Kai shook his head, trying to disperse this strange sound, but to no avail. Just after the first shout, a second shout soon followed, and then a third, a fourth. In just a few breaths, Yang Kai felt countless voices ringing in his head. These countless voices jumbled into an incoherent noise before eventually converging into two words. It was naturally his name. Having wounded Yang Kai, Jianba doggedly pursued him, but just as he was about to make his move, a great sense of horror suddenly gripped his heart. The moment this sense of horror emerged, Jianba's eyes went wide. It was not terror or fear Jianba felt though, but instead extreme excitement. Because ever since his cultivation had reached its peak, no one had been able to give him such a feeling. Even in this taboo realm, where he had encountered countless masters, no one had struck true terror into his heart. But at this moment, against an enemy who had been wounded by him, this long-lost feeling had reappeared. Jianba couldn't help but recall the masters he had faced when he was weak. The sword that had accompanied him all his life began to hum, warning him to retreat. Jianba didn't retreat though. Instead, he swung his sword down, causing the expressions of Chongjiao and the other experts watching from afar to become extremely solemn. Because this attack could be said to be the strongest sword attack they had ever seen. It was Jiangba's all-out strike. Once he executed this attack, his target would definitely die. The sword light filled everyone's vision, blinding them. When the sword light disappeared, Chongjiao and the other master quickly looked up, and what entered their sight made their eyes crack wide open in shock. Much to their surprise, Yang Kai had not blocked that sword strike at all and simply let it fall on his shoulder. It almost severed his arm, but it didn't, as the endless river water happened to be wrapped around Jianba's sword and wrist, preventing him from following through. Although Yang Kai was injured, his expression was extremely strange. He seemed a little confused yet also a little relieved. What caught Chongjiao's attention was the void behind Yang Kai, which looked extremely unusual at the moment. It happened to be continuously distorting, and through this distorted space, a faint distortion of spacetime emerged from some unknown place. The restriction of this place had been broken. When Chongjiao recalled Yang Kai's confident words, his heart began to pound violently. Could it be that the rumors circulating in the taboo realm are true? Did enough people in Yang Kai's universe still remember him? But, how is that possible? Anyone who entered this place would be quickly forgotten. Otherwise, how could the masters who had entered this place be unable to leave even after so many eons? But other than this possibility, Chongjiao could not find a better explanation. Yang Kai. He quickly called out. Yang Kai, who was immersed in this wonderful feeling, raised his head and smiled at him before turning to look at Jianba, who was still standing at arm's length. Under Jianba's stunned gaze, Yang Kai stretched out two fingers and grabbed his sword. It turns out that only by breaking the restriction here can one pry into the higher realms of the martial Tao. Saying so, Yang Kai gently raised his fingers, lifting up the long sword that had cut into his shoulder. The corners of Jianba's eyes twitched violently as his instincts were giving off warning bells. At this moment, Yang Kai gave him a very strange feeling, as if he was about to achieve some kind of breakthrough. This feeling left him in a great shock. The masters in the taboo realm had already reached their limits. The reason they were trapped here was because they wanted to break through to higher realms, but in the end, they had touched upon the taboos of the heavens. Today, he had seen both an amazing truth and an incredible secret. Breaking the restriction of this place would allow one to gain insight into the next realm. This was a huge blow to Jianba's mental state. Not to mention him, even Chongjiu, who was watching from afar, and the companion Jianba had invited, felt the same way. Stand down. Yang Kai looked at Jianba and declared. Jianba naturally ignored him, gritting his teeth as he poured all his strength into the long sword and pushed it down without muttering a word, seemingly intent on cutting Yang Kai in two. The sword in his hand was his Dao. Backing down would be equivalent to abandoning his Dao, so how could he possibly agree? Martial Peak, Chapter 6007, he left. Whether it was High Heaven Territory star boundary, or the universe worlds of myriad monsters territory, everywhere where humans had settled, humans were chanting Yang Kai's name non-stop, singing his praises, spreading the name of Void Great Emperor. For the first few days, nothing unusual happened, but as time passed, a strange sound started ringing in everyone's ears, like waves crashing onto the shore. Furthermore, the sound became louder and louder with the continuous actions of the humans. Finally, at a certain moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. Everywhere the humans were gathered, a river suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The sonorous sounds of waves crashing were originating from the river, and everyone witnessed this magical sight. The water in the river swelled and flowed towards the horizon, passing through the endless void, flowing through one great territory after another, to the late ancient era battlefield, and finally converging on the final battlefield where Yang Kai and Mo fought each other. The dozen or so of Yang Kai's close relatives in the palace looked excited at the sight of this. Their chanting became more hurried, and their expressions more fervent. The river was illusory at first, as if it existed in another space-time, but it soon became real and tangible. Immediately afterwards, a figure emerged from the tumultuous waves in the river. Looking at the figures standing in the palace, the figure cracked a smile and stated, "I'm back." The figures in the palace broke into tears of joy as they swarmed towards the figure one after another. Meanwhile, the masters in the taboo realm soon got the news and rushed over. Over 100 people had gathered in a short time, and more were still coming from afar. These people were all supreme masters of their respective universes. Each and every one of them had reached their own limits. Every single one of them used to be a legendary figure where they came from. But now, their worlds had long forgotten about them, causing them to be trapped in this taboo realm. Over 100 of the strongest masters in existence were calmly standing around the location where Yang Kai had fought with Jiangba, staring at a corpse floating nearby. The corpse naturally belonged to Jianba. Jianba was tightly holding a broken sword in his hand, while the cause of his death was none other than the other half of his sword being rammed through his chest. Dead. There was no shortage of brave and ruthless men in the taboo realm, and battles broke out all the time. These were the kind of battles one would seldom see in the outside world. Be that as it may, very few people actually lost their lives during these fights. Because although the cultivation methods were different for universe to universe, everyone's prime focus would be their Dao, after their cultivation had reached its utmost limit. It could be said that all things lead to the same destination. As a result, everyone's strength was basically the same here. So, no matter how intense a battle was, very few people would die. The last time someone died was over 100,000 years ago, and that was because a certain man with a horrible personality ultimately drew everyone's ire and was besieged by many supreme masters. But the current situation was far from that. It was pretty obvious that Jianba had not died because he was ganged up on. No matter what kind of Dao they were cultivating here, they all had sharp vision and insight. The one who had killed Jianba was just a single man. Furthermore, Jianba's opponent had killed him so easily that he had even snapped Jianba's sword in two. Even if these supreme masters present here weren't very familiar with Jianba, most of them had fought him at least once in the past. Jianba's sword was his Dao. So, killing someone might not be a big deal, but killing someone while destroying their Dao at the same time was inconceivable. What the Supreme Masters were concerned about was that they had sensed some unusual fluctuations a while ago. Even when they were far away, those fluctuations were as bright as a match in the darkness. Those were clearly the fluctuations caused by someone breaking through their current cultivation realm. But by the time they arrived here, they didn't see anything. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the faces of Chongjio and Jianba's companion were filled with a bitterness, their expressions way worse than eating a bitter pill. Both had witnessed Jianba's death at the hands of Yang Kai, which had shook them to the core. By the time they came back to their senses, the Supreme Masters had already arrived here to investigate after noticing the commotion. As a result, they were unable to leave. If they tried to leave now, they would definitely be forced to stay. The Supreme Masters had been trapped here for far too long, so any unusual movements would definitely attract their attention, let alone a disturbance that exceeded the limits of their current strength. Who was here? Someone suddenly asked. Although it was a random question without a head or tail, the meaning behind it was obvious. The speaker was obviously asking who had witnessed Jianba's death. No one answered. Who arrived here first? Someone asked. Still no answer, but the eyes of the Supreme Masters began to wander across each other, their gazes swiftly changing as they reached a certain unspoken agreement. Finally, everyone's eyes landed on Chongjio. Chongjio scowled in anger as he stared at the colleague invited by Jianba. Why are you only looking at me? He was here as well. Although the two were originally on different sides, they clearly had no choice but to band together at this moment. If they didn't handle this situation well, they might become the public enemies of all the Supreme Masters, so they couldn't afford to be careless. There was no escape from this taboo realm. If they became public enemies, things would be hard-pressed for them in the future. Who killed Jianba? An old man with small stature asked. This old man had been trapped in the taboo realm for who knows how many years. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was one of the oldest Supreme Masters in the taboo realm. At least, these 100 or so Supreme Masters present had all come to the taboo realm later than him. It wasn't me, Chongjio quickly clarified, I'm not that capable. The Supreme Master standing beside him also quickly denied, I didn't kill him either. You were here first, didn't you see who did it? The short old man asked. Although he was the only one who spoke, he represented everyone. Well, Chongjio hesitated for a moment. He knew that no matter what, he couldn't avoid this matter. Rather than drawing everyone's ire, he might as well speak the truth. After understanding this point, he finally answered, Yang Kai killed him. Who is Yang Kai? The short old man frowned. He had never heard of this name before. He was a newcomer whose Dao strengths had manifested into a river. He arrived about 8,000 years ago, someone explained. The short old man finally understood, I seem to have some impression of him, but how could a newcomer kill Jianba? Where is he? He left, Chongjio replied. Where did he go? He left, from this place. The Supreme Masters were stunned for a moment before staring at Chongjio in shock. Being the focus of attention of so many Supreme Masters, Chongjio felt as if an enormous mountain was weighing down on him. The Supreme Master who was standing by his side subtly stepped away from him, drawing a clear line between them. You said, he left this place? The short old man asked. Although his tone remained calm, his heart was in turmoil. Brothers, sisters, there's no need to stare at me like that, he really did leave. This friend and I saw it with our own eyes, Chongjio stated as he pointed towards the Supreme Master who had just stepped away from him. The man's face darkened, but he knew he couldn't avoid it. All he could do was brace himself and nodded, yes, he did leave. Chongjio smiled and said, weren't you all attracted by those strange fluctuations? I'll be frank with you, according to the rumors, there are two ways to leave the taboo realm, and the second method is apparently true. Yang Kai used that method to leave this place. What's more, when he broke through the restrictions here, he seemed to also break through to the next realm, allowing him to kill Jianba. Since ancient times, it had been passed down that there were two ways to escape the taboo realm. One was to constantly fight and kill other Supreme Masters. So long as you killed enough Supreme Masters, you would have a chance to leave this place. The second was to have enough people from your original universe remember you and wish for your return. Whether the first method would work or not, no one knew, because few people ever died in the taboo realm. But now, the second method had been proven effective. If Chongjiu wasn't lying, Yang Kai had left the taboo realm using this method. Under these circumstances, there was no need for Chongjiu to lie, everyone was well aware of this. How is that possible? Once we arrive here, the denizens of our worlds would have quickly forgotten about us. Without any memories, how can they remember us? This is simply impossible, someone questioned. Chongjiu spread out his hands and stated, I don't know. In any case, Yang Kai told me a long time ago that his world would never forget him. Perhaps because he saved his universe, the people of that world still remember him? The Supreme Masters still found it difficult to accept this, because from ancient times until now, there had never been a precedent of anyone leaving this place. But now, a newcomer who had only entered 8,000 years ago had done just that. This made them envious, but at the same time, they also saw a glimmer of hope. If someone could leave here, it meant that this taboo realm wasn't a prison they couldn't escape from, it was just that they had not found the right way. It was definitely impossible to count on Yang Kai's methods. Not mentioning who knows how his world still remembered him, the main reason was that he had only been here for 8,000 years. The others had simply been here for far too long. Before Yang Kai, the previous Supreme Master to arrive here had done so some 20,000 years ago. After tens of thousands of years, all traces of his existence in his world would have long since vanished. You can get a glimpse of the next realm after breaking the restrictions here? What kind of realm is that? The short old man asked. Chongjiu shook his head, I don't know what realm he reached, but once he broke through, he casually snapped Jian Ba's sword with just 2 fingers. All the Supreme Masters gasped in shock. What those 2 fingers destroyed was not just a sword, but Jian Ba's Dao. One could only imagine what amazing realm Yang Kai must have reached at that instant. Everyone, before Yang Kai left, he told me that he will find a way to rescue me. Although I don't know if he would be able to do it, if he does, everyone here will have new hope of finding a way out. Chongjiu threw out another piece of news that excited everyone. In an instant, the expressions of all the Supreme Masters present changed. Half a day later, the Supreme Masters finally dispersed. Chongjiu let out a long sigh and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although he was also a Supreme Master and didn't fear any individual in the taboo realm, being stared at by hundreds of masters just as strong as him still felt like being stabbed multiple times. If he hadn't thrown those words at the last moment, Chongjiu believed that these guys would have attacked him together and then interrogated him for more information. Even if he had already divulged everything he knew. However, everything was different once he spoke those last words. As long as they still wished to leave the taboo realm, they would not make things difficult for him in the future. In fact, if anyone dared to make things difficult for him, they would become public enemies of this taboo realm. That you're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.